Okay. Jared, thanks for the question. So I agree with the go Navy beat Army part. So I totally agree.
Hey guys, we're watching the Artemis come back to Earth. They're gonna splash down in about an hour.
What's going to happen is
And the last time this happened was in the 70s, and it wasn't
so we're
this
just
detailed. So this is very cool.
towards
So we are live.
basically 3 to 4 years of people would expect to land. And then as they go to splash down and they make sure that all the debris has fallen, they'll move into within a mile. So nowadays you could so well target compared to like Apollo, where sometimes the capsule didn't land anywhere near the ship, and I know Teasel can talk to that. Nowadays we have a pretty good idea where things are going to happen. So they'll be watching closely, and so it will be very quick. The crew will be picked up by helicopter. The crew will be taken back. They're going to come out. You'll see them on this. They call it the front porch, an inflatable. They'll come out on there. They'll take them in helicopters right back to San Diego. When they get to San Diego, they'll put them on plane. They'll head to Johnson Space Center. So that'll all happen very quick.
Bilo, we're live on YouTube.
So after the crew is out safely, the ship.
I was live on TikTok, but my son wanted me to go live here so he and his friend could watch it from the room. And I don't even think they know that I'm on.
Range of expectation, and the crews were recovered relatively quickly. So for Apollo 11, for instance, it was, I think, 13 miles from the recovery vessel, and so it did not take long for the the important Navy support to come and recover the astronauts. I'll say that for that mission, it took 7,000 people to help with that recovery. So many different vessels and aircraft from the Navy supporting that recovery. But in general, for most those Apollo missions, Mercury and Gemini, they were recovered relatively quickly. There was one mission, I believe, that they had to wait for about an hour because it came down and in the wrong area and the communications were limited. But for the most part, it's relatively quick. The astronauts are prepared for having to be in the spacecraft for quite some time, though, and they go through survival training in case they land and have to deal with being in a boat for a little while or anything that goes wrong. And so they're well prepared to remain in the spacecraft for as long as they need to.
I even thought I read this morning that the orange suits they get back into will help them survive if they need to for an extended period of time.
Yeah, so those have life support systems for 6 days, including food and water, and so that they could survive in those if need be. But also there's other equipment.
I'm geeking out. This is so cool.
Our guests are joining us here.
They're gonna be here in about an hour. Oh, splashdown is in 54 minutes. I didn't even notice the timer changed, but it's right there. They changed the way they were showing it.
What's a party like when they're watching astronauts come back to Earth?
They got a little watch party going there.
Has no shortage of space nerds, pilots, and just those who are curious about what's going on.
Space nerds, he said. I guess I'm a space nerd.
In the past few years, their interest had kind of died down, but since seeing the initial Artemis 2 launch in early April and just those amazing photos that we've seen come out of it over the last 10 days, that is what got them out here today. Not to mention the fact, guys, that Artemis 2 will be landing not so far from where we are, 100 miles off the coast. That's where the Navy is staging, preparing to take the capsule back here. We're expecting it to arrive on shore in the nearby Navy port around 12:30 local time on Saturday. But there's a lot of enthusiasm. Keep in mind that San Diego is a community that is home to so many people in the Navy, so many people with a connection to the Space Force, the armed forces all around, and so they're really ready to see this historic moment up close and personal. You can hear Mission Control above me. People are counting down the minutes until we get to that splashdown moment. How many people there, and what's the age range of those there with you? There are several hundred people here, no shortage of age range. We're talking all the little youngins dressed up in astronaut costumes, all the way up to some elderly folks who were in different wars and have served in different conflicts. San Diego community very in touch with the armed forces, definitely out here to learn more. While they're here, they've had the chance to browse the other exhibits that are part of the San Diego Air and Space Museum, including a pretty impressive display of what happened on some of the Apollo missions. Several of our colleagues are inside there, trying to get a real a grasp of what the NASA program has been over the past several decades. We're talking about this being the return to the moon. But remember, guys, there of course was that initial mission over 50 years ago that was the genesis for what we are doing and seeing here today.
And Mr. Thompson, as the night progress or the afternoon progresses for you, what kind of events is it? Just watching what's going on up until the splashdown?
Tell me if you guys want it louder.
Well, there's a host of VIPs in tow, including several former NASA astronauts who are here. Will be making an appearance, talking to the children, talking to some of the visitors. But of course, the focus is on that big event at around 8:10 or 5:10 local time, which is splashdown. We have the mission control feed behind me up from NASA. All eyes will be on that. And assuming all goes to
Hi, Bilo's universe. Hi. Louder? Louder than that?
really historic moment.
It's your world, squirrels.
Okay, Ryan Thompson from Spectrum News. He's at that San Diego watch party. We'll check in with him a little while later in the program. Mr. Thompson,
It's
thanks.
so cool.
Being snacks. I should have thought about that during this program.
They're in such a tight space. I don't know if I could do that. I'm a tiny bit claustrophobic.
Seen perspectives that no astronaut has seen. Put that in perspective of your knowledge of the Apollo program.
The images that have been coming back have been absolutely extraordinary, and all the commentary I've heard about them, people are so inspired by what they're seeing. And one of the really important perspectives from the area of the moon is looking back at Earth and seeing how much
They went to the moon. They're on their way back. They're gonna splash down, I think, in California in 50 minutes. I don't think they landed on the moon. I think they did like a loop around it. I don't think they went around it. They didn't land on the moon, if I'm not mistaken.
is quite moving. And so those images that show that perspective, I think, have been absolutely extraordinary. It's also been very
Big
exciting.
country. I don't think they landed on it.
It's just been thrilling seeing these images come back.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say, I think what happens is, when people talk about they're excited at the Space Museum and they're excited about this mission, and they asked Jeremy about like what is inspiring about the mission. How do we keep inspiring another
I
generation?
mean, more people join. Yes, I hope so. They still have 49 minutes to splash down. I just wanted to capture all of this because this is historic. The last time this was in the 70s and it didn't have like this detailed coverage. I want this on my channel forever. I want to be able to look back at this live. This is really cool.
That's what's going to inspire people. That's what inspired me as a kid, right? That's the only reason I got in this business was from watching real people working on real.
He's a NASA guy.
Add a comment.
And they were saying if you missed it, that they had to take some medication, and that when they get here, they're gonna have to get their Earth legs back. So they're probably gonna need help walking.
And astronauts came back to Earth, and they had this big celebration in Los Angeles with President Nixon, and of course, their dessert was, I think it was called the Claire de Lune, and it was a moon themed dessert. But my favorite space snack celebration story is there was a bartender at the Savoy in London who came up with a cocktail especially for the astronauts. I mean, he was famous for coming up with cocktails for all sorts of important guests to his bar. Like
That was when they were taking off on the left.
he came
Crazy.
cocktail. You can look up the recipe. It's quite lovely. It's light. It's refreshing. Good for a July day. And he actually ended up sending batches of it to the astronauts so that when they returned home, they could toast with this moonwalk cocktail. Yeah, there's a long history, more stories than that even to how we celebrate these missions.
Mitch from Oregon, thanks for calling in. Go ahead.
I don't have any comments or questions or anything, but us back here in Oregon, we're huge space fans, and I would really love to buy the astronauts a beer sometime. If they would love to join, that would be fun. Wishing them nothing but a happy and safe landing.
I would be nervous too. And they're trained for that. I would be more than cracking my knuckles. I'd be doing more than cracking my knuckles.
And meeting the astronauts, celebrating the astronauts, and back in the Apollo era, the astronauts traveled around the country and around the world.
It's probably more dangerous to take off into space than to land.
The different locations. They wanted to get back into the United States by the Apollo 12 mission, so they had a limited amount of time, but they met with millions and millions of people around the world, had motorcade celebrations, gave lectures, met with foreign dignitaries. But the same was true of other missions as well. And astronauts also traveled throughout the country in later missions. They did college tours and met with students. So there's a long tradition of these post.
You want to know how to play Fortnite video? Ethan can do that.
Been announced yet, but it'll be really exciting to see what they're
Another
planning.
day, we're doing a gaming setup for him so that he can play on this channel. He has a setup, but he needs a camera to do the split screen. So once we figure out which one is the best or
Be the one that are gonna get the
which one he wants, we'll be able to do that, and he'll be able to do it. But for now, he can do a live, just this showing him playing whatever game you guys want to see on his PS5.
We're expecting that separation from the crew module and the service module.
Happened is it past 7:15? So at around 7:15, what will happen is they've been talking through the Deep Space Network. They've been talking through these really large antennas.
Not right now, but we're gonna have him play any game you guys want and show you guys.
But
Not during this landing.
geostationary belt.
Whatever live you guys want to see, let us know. And I'll have him play whatever game you want, and he can go live on this channel. We also do giveaways, so you want to stay tuned for whenever we do lives. We do gift card giveaways.
Needing the big dish anymore. They're communicating with that system, and so that's the big transition. And then 7:30 will be the separation.
Jeff, listen, one of the storylines today, particularly, was the idea of the heat shield. Tell us why that's important to know.
Yeah, well, so the heat shield's got a lot of attention because of Artemis 1, right? So during the Artemis 1 mission, there was some challenges with the heat shield. It degraded more than they expected. So what they've done for this mission, they've looked at the entry profile. So it does a skip profile. This is similar to Apollo, right? So they're going to come in at a really heavy,
Well,
high.
that's what's gonna happen when they come in. Those parachutes are gonna open up.
Very fast.
Wow.
A lot of heat buildup. And then they're going to raise the capsule a little bit, let it cool a little bit, and then come back down through the rest of the atmosphere. So they've changed that profile a little bit. They felt like maybe they skipped a little higher. They let it cool a little bit too much. It affected the material. So this time they've adjusted it a little bit. But that is an important part of this reentry. Now, that reentry shield is going to peel away. It's made to peel away as it comes back. So the outer layer of the shield will get hot, it'll start to burn, and it will fall away. And that's exactly how it's been designed. It's thick enough that over the entry profile, it'll kind of wear
Yeah, they're
itself.
gonna land off the San Diego coast.
It's pretty be at the right angle so that as it's coming through the atmosphere, although it's going to get hot, it doesn't get too hot. It's going to be about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit at its peak. And if they come in too steep, it'll get too hot. Capsule will burn up. If they come in too shallow, you could have a case where they can't get through the atmosphere to land. So they have to come in just at the right
Look at them,
angle.
they're ready.
Shield technology changed since the Apollo days.
So there are many links actually in the technology of the heat shield from the Apollo days to today. So they're using a similar material. It's called Avcoat, and it's just been updated they took out some of the materials, I believe, formaldehyde, because we don't use that anymore. But it's more or less the same material they used during the Apollo era. The big major difference is the application. So how the heat shield is actually built. And so during the Apollo era, it was a solid heat shield, and it
Makes me want to be an astronaut.
run to go find an Apollo command module near where you live. They're across the country, and look
Switch career paths.
home structure. And there are hundreds of thousands of individual cells that were filled in by hand by technicians. So really laborious work, and they injected this Avcoat resin into every single individual cell. It cured, and then they scanned it and
This is like a biology video.
I see that if you go see one of these Apollo command modules in person. So taking a lot of safety into consideration, but how solid that heat shield was and that structure helped make it such a successful technology during the Apollo days. And that's one of the issues that arose with Artemis 1 and the heat shield. And when they looked at some of the issues when that mission was finished, was that they noticed some cracks running through the heat shield. That honeycomb structure prevented those cracks from spreading, right? If you can imagine it here, each of those little metal honeycomb structures would prevent runs within the heat shield, and so that was part of the benefits of that earlier design. And I will say that after Artemis 1, NASA did reach out to me to get more information about the Apollo heat shields. And it makes a lot of sense. We don't have that many spacecraft that have traveled to the moon, and we have these wonderful examples that we can use to learn lessons from today.
And you can go to the National Air and Space Museum and see them up close and personal, I imagine.
Well, yeah, what was funny was that, 20 years ago, when we started working on the Orion capsule, we looked at like a zillion different ways to build a heat shield. Kind of ended up with the Apollo material being the best material. So although it's a little bit dated and you had to take a different formula of it, it's still one of the best ideas on how to get through an atmosphere.
Kian from Illinois. Hello, we're on with our guest. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Hi.
What?
There's a little girl talking. How cute.
And communicate with Earth before
How cute.
once they get back to Earth.
Once they get back to it.
How cute. Oh, it's a boy. Still cute.
Communication, if you wanted to pick up on that.
It's a great question. So during part of the reentry, they will not be able to communicate with us. I think there'll be about 6 minutes where there'll be a communication blackout. But then once they get closer to Earth, communications will return and we'll be able to hear from the astronauts and confirm that everything is okay. So they will be able to communicate before they're even recovered by the recovery crews.
And you already talked about the deep space acts, but anything you want to add when it comes to communications?
No, and that is, except for that 6 minutes, that is the modern day communication capability, right? Is that as soon as they're lower in the atmosphere and they can talk, they'll be talking all the way down. They'll be talking to the recovery crew. You'll see them, you'll hear them. Yeah, absolutely.
Audrey, let's try Audrey in Florida. We're just a few minutes from another big step in this, but Audrey, go ahead in Florida.
Was a beautiful, gorgeous day here.
I hope that helps.
Horizon to horizon. I watched it for several minutes. Took several pictures. It was wonderful. And now at this point for the landing, it's awesome. It's unbelievable that this technology is all there, that this can all happen. It's just very exciting.
Jeff Wilson, is this pretty much automated at this point, or is it still manual as far as things happening?
No, it has to be automated. In fact, the crew has been trained on how they can take control if needed. The crew has said, we hope we don't have to take control. It's much better. This is like in modern airplanes. There's so many things that are done better by the computer system. And during these critical events, it's best to leave the computer system to adjust the angle. So when they're separated and they're coming back, there's actually little jets firing on the capsule itself. So that's all being run by the computers on board to make sure they're at the right angle coming down. Crew does not want to be involved, but they can. They've been trained to get involved if they need to.
What you're seeing on your screen, the capsule there is about facing separation. Let's listen in a little bit.
Once again, just 10 seconds after entry interface, we will see integrity reaching its peak speed of 24,661.21 miles per hour. That will be just seconds before we begin a 6-minute blackout period.
Your vehicle is in a good condition for CMFM and go for CM rates.
With you today on board, it's up to go with the array. That CM raise referred to as the slight firing of 19 seconds by Integrity's thrusters with a change in velocity of 9.9 feet per second, a slight nudge of the aft end of the vehicle so that it's tilted a bit upward, providing the final angle of attack as the vehicle enters the Earth's atmosphere. This being the mitigating factor that will reduce heat loads on the heat shield as we reach a point downrange from the start of entry interface, some 1,701 nautical miles to the splashdown site. Integrity systems in excellent shape. We are currently 3,300 nautical miles left in this mission. Splashdown schedule 36 minutes, 39 seconds from now.
For the two enabled prop often, what happened is while the thrusters were firing, multiple pressure sensors on each of the strings diverged from each other. The limit was to be pretty tight. We think it could happen again when the thrusters fire in the future, so we are going to suppress those messages.
Not it, but thank you. That exchange between Jackie Mahaffey, our Capcom for tonight, and Reed Wiseman aboard Integrity, indicating basically to ignore sensor data. All of Integrity systems are in good shape.
Yeah, they're like crying from there. They said they're gonna communicate on there for a little bit, and they're still like, "Hi, you here?" For a couple minutes, and then finally when we hear you, then they know that they're good. But like they're doing this communication for over. Yeah.
Now, coming up on about 90 seconds till the crew module service module separation.
My God, so crazy.
I know, right?
And it looks like they're not even moving. What?
I'm talking next.
No. It looks like they're not even moving.
I know, right? I thought my live was paused.
It was they showed up picture like next to Earth and I'm like, oh my god.
Of the flight, all of the preparatory activities leading up to the vehicle entering the Earth's atmosphere just 21 minutes.
34 minutes and they'll be back home
Dang,
with their families.
that's happy.
Yes. And it's so tight the space they're in. I'd be like, get me out of here.
Coming up on 1 minute.
Imagine you didn't see me for a while. I was coming. And it was a dangerous trip. Wouldn't you be like so excited waiting for me?
Yeah, I'd probably be watching it on.
No, you'd be there waiting by the where they're gonna meet the people.
I'd also put it on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Like to watch it, you know.
Yeah. They're all set up ready, waiting for them.
Oh.
Off the San Diego coast.
Oh.
It's so creepy. They look like they're not moving. Oh my god, it's separating!
Service module separation. And a great view.
That's crazy. What a shot. Did you see that? Look. No, look at it in the live.
I did.
Oh.
That is so crazy.
Okay.
No action for the four options, so that FM related, not applicable.
Yay, way to go, guys.
They already landed?
No,
Oh.
the module separated. properly.
So, with Integrity now flying free on its own for the remaining 32 minutes of this mission. Next up,
What's his channel?
Raysburn.
Go ask him what's his channel name. They could put shout out. He's just to say.
There's a
His name
separation
for the
between
channel.
Wilson.
James, we got James on this live. James is our homeboy and he wanted a shout out. James, I don't know if you want us to shout out your username or your name, but James. What's up, James? James is a cool guy. And James wants a shout out.
Shout out to James.
You just got a shout out from Bilo too. You got a shout out from Peca and from Bilo. Now go make sure he heard the shout out.
The company of the spacecraft was an explosion in one of the oxygen tanks.
James, we shouted you out.
It happened. The astronauts didn't have this view from outside the spacecraft.
Go subscribe to James's channel. James, put your channel in the chat. Oh, I guess.
So they really had to wait.
Yeah, James, type your channel in the chat
Sort of
so people can see it and subscribe.
so that they could get information to help assess what had gone wrong. Because at that point, they had a sense, they knew they lost a lot of oxygen, but the images they were able to capture then led to a lot of discoveries. During
Look at them waiting on the ship.
So you've seen the separation. What are we expecting now, and when will we keep communication with them during this time in the next few minutes?
Yes.
31 minutes and they'll be here. So crazy. 31 minutes.
Capsule, right? So you're like, okay, did everything still look okay?
Did you hear?
Yeah, he's putting it on.
Right. So
Oh,
I think from a heat shield perspective, it probably.
I think I need my battery pack charger.
And the crew capsule will now move away, and then
Oh,
so
right.
what we're talking about is that coming up here.
I mean, your battery pack charger?
Will start to come into the atmosphere, right? Is that about 753?
That's the schedule we have, yes.
Yeah, so we'll be at about 400,000 feet at that point. So got a little time here where the capsule's going to get oriented, make sure it's at the right angle. The crew's going to check everything. You heard them talking about a couple small signals that they got. I think was when they fired the thrusters. There's a couple different pressure sensors in the system. They want to agree the pressure.
Oh, yeah, hold it.
When they fired the thrusters, they got different.
It's too heavy. I'll hold that.
readings. It's not like they typically ignore a problem, but in this case, it was a kind of a spurious reading during that maneuver. And then I think when they separated, they got a couple readings.
Imagine,
Dang, it's heavy.
imagine landing from space. It's like kind of scary.
Screens.
I mean, like they're used to it, I guess. And they've trained for this, but
Same like
no,
like the
it's so
new
scary.
recruit.
They've been training for this for years. Years they've been training for this.
And
Keyword. Mission
Can you
control.
hold this?
Constant communication. Sometimes
So there'll be constant communication for now. Once they hit the 30,000 foot level, so that's when that 6 minutes of blackout will start. And so there'll be a period there. Again, the heat in the front of the capsule will start to create this plasma around it, and that electrically charged plasma will not allow them to communicate. Someday we hope to be able to do that. There's some
Okay.
ideas. Right now, that's a period where the crew can't talk to the earth. Everything is automated at that.
For 6 minutes, they're not gonna be able to communicate with us.
dang, something bad could happen in those 6 minutes.
No, it won't. They'll be fine.
Parachute opening, so
let's go to Calvin. Calvin.
And nothing bad's gonna happen.
Calvin and Shingle Spring. Go ahead.
Thank you guys for your wonderful visual on TV. I'm here with my daughter Piper. You had a question?
Oh, that's smart. That's a good question.
Calvin.
Yeah, Piper.
Piper, great question. We'll let our guest take that on.
Yeah, fantastic question, Piper. So it really
That's
depends on
crazy.
how long the astronauts have been in space. So when they come back from the International Space Station, if they've been there for 6 months or something like that, they really have to train their bodies how to be back on Earth and to deal with gravity again. You hear these stories of astronauts who've been to the International Space Stations are learning how to walk, and then sometimes forgetting that there's gravity and falling, and so it's quite a challenge. They have to build back some of that muscle. But for a mission like this, it should not take very long for the astronauts.
Yeah, because they didn't stay out that long. They weren't out in outer space that long.
Yeah.
That as soon as they return, they'll stretch their legs, they'll start moving around. We saw with the earlier missions, the astronauts were able to walk immediately after their flight. So a mission that's this short, it really shouldn't take too long for them to acclimate to be.
Yeah, and the good thing is they'll have a whole medical crew all around them, right?
Yeah.
In any way, woozy or anything, they'll have a lot of people help them right away.
Yeah.
And showing folks that
Water?
is John Murray.
No, well, they are gonna meet them.
I know, but like they're gonna get
Yes, for sure.
they're gonna be a medical.
Story.
They're probably gonna. They either might be on the boat that picks them up. Probably the medical crew will probably on the boat be on the boat that picks them up. But if not, it'll be right where they land on land, ready, waiting for them. And then they're probably gonna be taken to like a facility to be checked out. So
What they want to do is get back to their medical team that can really do all the in-depth,
Yeah.
what did you see, what did you do?
he's answering that.
That's right. So they want to get them back. So it's going to be way different than what we saw back in the 60s.
There's like a lot of people there on the boat.
Yeah, look at all the camera crew.
Yeah.
Look at the moon. That looks like the moon. Is that the moon?
Um,
That makes sense. It's 8 p.m. Eastern time. See over there?
about 920 miles south.
See, like right. Oh, they took it away.
Yeah, I saw.
Whoa, look at the separation.
And a team recovered them, brought them back to the aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier then went to Pearl Harbor, so it took about 2 days to get to Pearl Harbor. And
my
then there
God.
they met an airplane, which then flew them directly back to.
Wow.
But for that mission, I will say the astronauts were in quarantine, so a slightly different protocol was necessary, and so they had to do the whole trip inside of an Airstream trailer.
Viewers, and we just want to let you know that we're just showing you video of the separation.
25 minutes.
And as other things are lining up to happen before splashdown just after 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 8:07, I believe it is exactly, with our guest. Let's go to Richard. Richard in North Carolina.
You don't see it through your phone?
I was always like, normally stuff. Do they just like
It stays, yeah. Weird.
oh,
It doesn't. There's like a bunch of space junk out there, apparently.
I'm very proud of them, and thank you guys for hosting all this.
I know, this is cool. This is really good. 32 minutes.
The space program stopped. That wasn't the case.
That wasn't the case, and also during the shuttle program, when that ended, sometimes people thought it stopped. What NASA is doing is incredible. Human spaceflight's just a little part of it, and throughout time, there have been all these other really important programs and astrophysics and heliophysics, planetary science. We can go on and on and on. And it's so exciting to see the attention that Artemis program is getting. Like your wife, it was really hard for me to do anything else this week besides just follow that coverage constantly. It was so much fun to see every single moment of this mission so far, and I think it has drawn a lot of attention and enthusiasm for space exploration, and I hope that people pay more and more attention to what NASA's doing.
So on Apollo historian, was it bittersweet to see records being broken by this crew and say,
Maybe records that are
They have spaceship beef.
Here's one that I don't think there's no one's ever going to break this, which is the
The
first
naming of the crater after the guy's deceased wife.
You think of that, half the world, 1 in 2 people were doing something together. That is absolutely extraordinary. If anyone knows of any example or anything that rivals that, but I don't think so. The numbers now, that the population is greater. We do have, lots of people tuning in to all sorts of things, but half the world doing something together. It's really quite remarkable, and Apollo might be the only.
In a way, and Richard, that was really eloquent. And I think it's bringing out the most eloquent in all of us in trying to kind of put into words how we feel about all of this. So whether it was
How
back,
cool would it be to be on that ship?
there's so many things in the world that are more challenging. You watch this and you're so inspired. We're all so inspired by these 4 people.
Oh, you don't have a channel, James? It doesn't matter. We can shout you out as James. Cool guy James. Shout out to James who's tuned in.
From Oregon, Tim, hello, you're on with our guest.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering about Mike Collins and the Apollo program. Did they go far on the far side of the moon?
Go for it.
Yeah, so it's great you brought up Mike Collins. So he was the command module pilot, and you're very correct that he orbited around the far side of the moon. There's been a lot of talk in this mission that these astronauts are seeing the far side of the moon, and they're seeing features of the far side that have never been seen before. And the reason for that is because some of the areas they've seen were in shadow during the Apollo mission. So all the Apollo missions were timed particularly so that the sun was at a particular angle, which meant that parts of the far side were not illuminated, and so they didn't see some of these features. With Artemis 2, they're also seeing the moon.
21 minutes. 21 minutes. It's so cool.
Orbital missions, they were orbiting about 60 miles around the moon, 60 miles from the moon. But this mission was much greater. So, right, that's like about was it 50,000? No, 5,000 miles. Sorry. Yeah. 5,000 miles. So it's greater distance, right? So, and that also allows them to see the far side of the moon in a different perspective. So a number of factors are contributing to why people are saying that with this mission, they're seeing the far side in a new and different way. And you're very right that Mike Collins orbited around, saw the far side by himself as his crewmates Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are walking on the lunar surface.
Yeah, I was going to say that what the difference is going to be this time is that when you see people go back to the moon and land, all of the crew will leave the capsule, get in the lander, and go to the surface. So now with automation, you could leave the capsule in orbit. Poor Mike Collins doesn't have to be up there by himself watching his teammates go down the surface. Everyone can go down. They'll get back to the capsule when they're done. So we are going to now be able to get those 4 people, hopefully, or more down the surface on future missions.
Whoa.
And speaking of perspective shots, look like we're getting a shot from the inside out.
Whoa.
Jeff Wilson, any impressions there as far as what we're seeing?
I think, so I was just looking, I think some of those, so the screen on the left, I think might be some footage from during the mission. That
Yes.
Screen on the right, I don't know, is that the current view? That is the Earth getting bigger down below.
Oh, yeah. That looks like it's their view of us. So crazy.
On there. And I was sitting in the green room watching, and the Earth was this little ball.
Yeah.
Right? That was a couple of hours ago. Now they're about ready to get to the fringe of the atmosphere. You can kind of tell that they're in that upper fringe of the atmosphere at that point. So it's amazing how fast they're traveling.
Heck of a car window that they're looking out of.
To the airplane window. Oh, was that some Minecraft?
You're going to see orange and red flame. And so that's going to be slightly disconcerting. They've trained for that. But yeah, that beautiful view out the window will look like fire in a minute.
The interface 753, remind us of what that is.
Yeah, so that's when they get to that 400,000 foot level ish. And that's when they start that entry profile. That's when the heating starts on the outside of the capsule.
It's gonna look fiery in a little bit.
Start the 6-minute buff out.
And the concerns at that point when it comes to safety of the crew is
Well, this is where that heat shield has got to do its job, right? This is what everyone's worried about. That is the first couple minutes of the entry where they're
Well, God, get them here safely.
The outside of that shell at the bottom, and the capsule has to be pointed in the right direction, and the heat shield has to hold up, and so that's the most critical period of this whole flight.
Whoa.
I imagine that at this point, Apollo saw a lot of these kind of situations happen, as well as getting things ready for re-entry.
Yes, so there's a lot of attention.
Whoa.
In the last few minutes, especially in the Apollo 13
That's
mission.
what's
There were a
gonna
lot of
happen.
potential damage to the heat shield from the explosion, and so this was a very nerve-wracking moment for everyone back in 1978, April 1970. And their blackout was longer.
That's what's gonna happen.
You can imagine if you were waiting on Earth to hear them communicate again, that it was taking longer. Really was quite nerve-wracking. But yes, this is very similar to those moments. So much about the re-entry is very similar between Apollo and Artemis.
Sydney joins us.
No, you cannot buy anything for $9. No games, no skins, no nothing. Watch the live and learn. Thank you.
So I guess that's my question, but if I would be doing this to be.
The chat is acting wild.
Yeah, so I think one of the big differences between this mission and Apollo, the Apollo astronauts we talked
Do it
about
again.
on the
You
side
did it again?
facing the Earth, but they could communicate back to the Earth, and so the other side of the moon was more in darkness. No,
No,
Sorry.
it was completely lit.
No, yeah.
no crazy people in the chat. You cannot buy anything. That's my son at Bilo's Universe asking if he can buy something on his game.
Is eliminated. And so what that meant is half
17 minutes, and then they're gonna turn fiery.
quarter moon. And what that did is it really helps add contrast and help them see the features. So when they were landing, it could be they were really clear about where the craters were, where the rocks were, the shadows were at the correct angle. And they actually did a lot of research on the angles of the sun and what would be ideal for landing. But that meant that every Apollo mission that was a similar phase of the moon, which meant that a similar area of the moon was illuminated by the sun. And so with these missions, you get a different part of the moon illuminated. And so that's one of the really big differences between the perspective of these astronauts. They also mentioned that they're able to see
Basically, how bright the Earth looks.
regions more clearly than the Apollo astronauts, and a large part is because the Apollo missions orbited very, very
From
close to the
there.
moon. So if you can imagine orbiting around the moon, you're going to see the central area of the moon up close, but the polar regions you're not going to get as much of a perspective at. So I imagine that was different for Apollo 13. That's the one mission.
15 minutes.
Distance, but all those other Apollo missions, they orbited close up to the moon, and just would have had a different perspective and a different illumination.
We're coming up. Oh, I'm sorry. We're coming up on an interface. Let's listen to a little bit of the communication that's going on.
Well, this is cool.
All of it. All of the activities today have gone off in perfect fashion. No issues with the vehicle, no issues with the crew. And the weather at the splashdown site is
Praise the Lord, amen. Whoa. What a view.
coming up on 1 minute until entry interface.
Oh my God. So so half the people on Earth were watching this during the 70s. That's a lot of people back then, and the population has increased. That's crazy.
Minute blackout.
1 minute to a 6-minute blackout.
No battle pass, no purchases on Fortnite. Mr. at Belo's Universe. Cut it out. No Fortnite purchases. No authorization for that. Wow, this is crazy. This is the view from their window.
Entry interface. And we have crossed the threshold now
Whoa,
entering the Earth's atmosphere.
whoa, whoa, whoa.
We're at 34,800 feet per second.
And the astronauts took a photo of Earth while they were in outer space and
2 minutes, 10 seconds.
said 4 people took this photo. This is a photo of, like, don't quote me, this is verbatim. This is a photo of all of you, everyone you know, everyone you love. That was really cool.
And we did our communications blackout.
Okay, now we can't see or hear them for 6 minutes, which is probably feels like eternity for them, for everyone involved. 6 minutes.
And there we go. As far as we've experienced blackouts before, as part of this mission, here we go into another one. Jeff Wilson, it looked like it was interesting how the whole perspective of the Earth changed depending on how the capsule was changing.
Yeah, they're getting that aligned for that final descent into the atmosphere. You can start to see some wisps of that plasma starting to build up. Right,
Whoa.
you can start to see they're entering that top of the
Wow.
atmosphere. It's amazing to think that 13 minutes later they're going to be down.
See that little dot.
Again, I hate to be repetitive, but from now until splashdown, what are we looking for?
So the blackout started. They're at the steepest descent angle right now. They built up this plasma. They're at 5,000 degrees
You
Fahrenheit.
can't see anything, just all that lack of view.
Gonna slowly make the capsule kind of rise up a little bit slow.
They're not feeding an image or audio for the next 5 minutes.
We'll get communication back. At that point, they'll start to go subsonic, right? So they'll go down below the speed of sound. And at that point, they can start to open up parachutes, but they're still going like, 300-400 miles an hour. So it's going to be a slow process. So you start to see two small parachutes come out. Those are going to stabilize the capsule.
Ethan,
Deployed.
close your door.
Then you'll see some other small parachutes come out. Those are going to pull the big chutes out. Then the big chutes are going to open a little
Ethan,
bit.
close your door.
More, and they're going to open up a little bit more. Because again, until you get going slower, you can't put that big parachute out; it'll just rip itself apart. And so it's going to be a long process of deploying bigger and bigger parachutes and opening them more and more during that last subsonic period. And that's just the last few minutes, from 20,000 feet or so down to the ground.
The shoots of today versus the shoots of the Apollo era, how would they be different?
Very, very similar, actually. And so they use this ring sail technology, which in the main parachutes, there are little holes in them, which allows some airflow through them. It helps them to stabilize. Early parachute development, they had this issue called squidding, where you can sort of imagine what that
Wow.
looked like. So the parachutes wouldn't unfurl.
That's what's gonna happen.
They squeeze. And so what they really through a lot of testing, they figured out that adding little holes basically to the parachute areas for the air to escape through actually increase the stability of these parachutes. But it was a very similar system. The Apollo system had a few fewer chutes, but the difference only it comes down to getting rid of the shield initially. So I think Artemis uses a handful of them. Apollo used one, but
And for the record, science is nothing without God.
shoots, and then you have those main shoots as well.
That's my belief, and I had to make that known, and I stand by it.
Similar type of time, and it's also a point where the astronauts are experiencing the most intense G forces. So once they get closer to the Earth, the landing, it'll be a more like 20.
Only God decides what happens, what doesn't happen.
Really going to be experiencing the most intense force. So it's during this phase that they are in Artemis. It should be 3.9.
Yes, 9 more minutes. I know, it's so crazy. So crazy.
Depending on the mission.
What was the difference between the G? Is it because of the capsule itself, or were there other factors?
Well, Earth is 1G when they get down here.
The speed and the weight, I think those contributed. But it wasn't a huge difference. It was relatively similar.
Again, the John Murtha there is what we're seeing on screen as we wait for this period to go through. We'll look at it and for a bit.
Yeah, and they hope to be they're about 4 or 5 miles away from where they think the capsule's going to land. And the goal is they want to.
We're still in the blackout period. Still do not have communications from the crew.
Still in that 6-minute blackout, which should be over soon. And they're landing in 8 minutes. Oh my God, it's crazy.
We're standing by for communications from the crew. We should be out of the blackout period less than a
This
minute.
says 12,420, and it's going down rapidly. Wow. 7 minutes.
We are now processing data from Integrity. Landing and support officer reports the small boats are en route to the splashdown target zone.
Oh, that's so cool. Whoa. They're transmitting again. Six minutes. Whoa. Wow. That's so crazy. They're 2,000 miles out. 6 minutes. They're going to come into use.
Trajectory is perfect. We're getting intermittent views of Integrity. Still waiting to establish voice communication.
It's coming. It's trying. Look at it. It's trying to transmit. Let's go.
Recovery teams have visual.
Let's go.
No action for the enabled internal camera controller fail.
Big cheers from the viewing room here in Mission Control as voice communication reestablished with Commander Reed Wiseman. For America and a waiting world, Integrity is 5.5 minutes away from coming home.
I think Commander Reed's wife is the one they named the crater after, Carol, who passed away. Whoa.
Now,
So crazy.
range to splash down 19 nautical miles.
5 minutes. It's 19 miles away. Whoa. My God. You could see the small boat right there.
Impact to the camera controller fail is no tab one views of the group.
Hmm.
We're processing good data through the GPS system.
4 minutes.
View of time to splash down 4.5 minutes.
Whoa, look at it.
And a view of Integrity from the WB-57. We're at 50,000 feet.
Whoa, whoa. That's so crazy. Looks like a UFO. 3 minutes to splash down. Look at it. You can see it clearly now.
Forward cover jettison.
Shouldn't they be releasing the parachute yet? Are you seeing it?
Yeah.
Look! Yay!
Series of parachutes. And we're on droves.
They're about to splash down. Oh my God, they're coming down so fast.
No.
Well, they put holes in the parachutes because there was like a problem. So they put little holes to solve it.
Next up, the deployment of pilot parachutes that will pull the main chutes out.
There's more chutes coming. They're coming down so fast. That must hurt unless it slows down way a bunch.
I don't think so.
They're gonna let out another set of parachutes, though. I think.
The flight dynamics.
2 minutes. It's crazy to see them when the view became clear of them.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's it. Clouds.
Passing through 10,000 feet. Still on
Whoa,
road.
whoa. This is crazy. Oh. Oh my God. That was cool.
Oh,
Made shoot deploy.
it looks like
One didn't look like it was opening properly. Like it's like it looked flat. I don't know if that's just our angle. There you go. See how it looks wider now? I feel like they should be spread out wider.
Yes.
There you go. Look at that. See how they're wide now?
Yeah.
Took them a little bit.
Briefing with that rate.
And we see 3 good looking parachutes.
I was saying, like, it didn't look good. They look like they didn't open properly. This is how they should look. They're saying they look good. Anyway, I'm sure they take into account if 1 or 2 or even all 3 of the shoots don't open properly.
Big thing.
Sounding
No.
Hale and Hardy on board. Time to splash down 1 minute 15 seconds.
I think.
Wow.
Love them so.
Mm,
I don't-
Everything is very calculated.
Integrity about to complete a journey spanning 694,481 miles. Let's launch from the Kennedy Space Center back on April 1st. And a trip
Oh,
around.
wow. They've been gone a while. April 1st. I didn't realize.
What's today?
Today is April 10.
Yeah, 10 days.
I thought they were there less than 10 days. Maybe like 5, I thought. Okay. 22 seconds. 20, 19, 18. Oh, look, look. You know, this looks like a black and white view, and then they have a color view. 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Happy landing!
They haven't even landed yet.
I know. I guess they didn't time it absolutely perfectly. That's fine.
That?
As long as they land safely. Like, that's a cool view, the color view.
Yeah.
That's like peppermints. You could just grab a candy. You guys want a peppermint? Here you go. Yes. Want a peppermint? You want a peppermint?
Confirmed. Splashdown confirmed at 7:07 p.m. Central Time, 5:07 p.m. Pacific Time.
That looked that looked like it hurt.
Mission to the moon, a new chapter of the exploration of our celestial neighbor is complete. Integrity's astronauts back on Earth.
All right. Amen. Thank you, God, for getting them back home safely.
Stable 1, we still will be.
Go get them!
Maintain that orientation. A perfect bullseye splash.
Yay! Those are probably a lot of relatives there.
Yeah.
No. Let's go. Go get them. I thought the boats would be, I guess they can't be too close. Oh, that must be a great feeling. You're like, okay, we made it. I mean, it's a great feeling for me when you land on a plane. Imagine that.
47 seconds p.m. Central Time. We'll get that refined for you. That would put the end of the mission at a mission elapsed time of 9 days.
So it's 5:09 Pacific time. Because they're in California. It's crazy. Is that underwater? Whoa, the boats are nowhere near them. Let's go.
We continue on with C-SPAN's coverage of the Artemis 2 splashdown, just taking place moments ago. These will be harmony.
Oh, there they are. Is that that?
Yes, I believe it.
You haven't seen it? What do you mean? Yeah, you don't watch.
Exactly.
There's like 3 small boats. They're so far. Go faster!
And it just goes a testament to all the work
Look at how far they are.
to get ready for this mission. I mean, just be watching each sequence, just how all those different parachutes are coming.
And isn't it way over there? It's way over there, guys. You're going the wrong way. Oh.
Yeah, I think, but the tension is high, right? Just like at blast off, you're thinking, wow, if something doesn't go well, this could be really a bad day, right?
Yeah.
And all the tension of this moment.
Praise God.
How relieved I am to be honest.
Yeah, must feel. It's hurry up. I know. Did they have to be that far? Was the possible landing area radius that far? Did they have to leave that much room for them?
Maybe.
So I think that's what picked it up in that package altitude. You could see the heat coming off of it. So I think that was a first camera on some kind of telescope or whatever. But so I think you might have been seeing just heat, like billowing, like gas coming off of it, as if the heat shield still had a lot of retained heat in it coming down.
Because it was like releasing heat, like it looked like it was releasing fire thrusts.
Coming out of the back of the shuttle. In that case,
Oh my goodness, they're so far.
image. So I think again that was some gas coming off maybe or something, but that was a thermal image you were looking at.
Yeah, that would be my guess as well. So.
They should open the capsule door and be like, Uber for Johnny.
From the capsule as well. Again, we'll continue on. If you want to keep calling and asking questions about what you just saw, 202-748-8920.
Very cool.
202-748-8921 for the Mountain and Pacific time zones, and 202-748-8922 if you live outside of the U.S. From California, this is Julian. Julian, hi. Go ahead. You're on. Good question. We talked about food a lot about this part related to this special.
It's an important part about being in space, and so it's changed a bit over time. But in general, they have food in packets. It's almost like when you go camping and you have food in little containers, and so often they'll heat it up and then they'll use spoons or other utensils to pull that food out.
Oh.
Ways in space, so now they even use tortillas and can eat that way. With drinks, though, it's a lot like a juice box or something like that. Or but there's a drink that comes in a pouch. It's a lot like that. So you can
Capri Sun.
But for the most part, eating in space is much like going on a camping trip or something like that, where you have everything in different containers. You rehydrate some of it. Some of it's what they call wet pack, which is already hydrated. You can heat some of it up, and then drinks tend to be out of pouches.
Yeah. And I think
so basically they probably have diarrhea from wet food in packets.
Again, that's come a long way. I think since we talked at launch, you talked a lot about like food and drink and coffee and everything. And I'm like, I started doing more research and I'm like, wow, they do have a lot more variety nowadays than they had back in the Apollo days. So yeah.
When astronauts finally have landed, what's the procedure now? Do they sit? Do they wait? Are there like checklists?
Well, they're sitting and waiting for that boat, taking forever.
Right,
their Uber is late
right now. So they're doing a lot of initial checks before they're going to let him out of the capsule to let everybody looks okay. They also got to make sure there are toxic, there's thrusters on the module. There's outgassing from the the bottom of the heat shield. So they do want to make sure that they let everything kind of cool off for a minute and dissipate. They also let go. If you saw real quick, right before they let go of the parachutes, they pop the cover off where the parachutes are. They want to know that landed somewhere so that they don't bring anybody over or get knocked on the head. So they want to make sure everything's clear before they drive over to start to pick them up. But they'll
Wow.
be going over. I think you mentioned it might be a little bit though.
I think they initially announced a broad window just in case the landing site was further from the recovery vessel. So they had said within 2 hours that the astronaut
They know where that door was gonna open.
how flawlessly this landing occurred. They'll set up what they call a porch, which is actually a raft to the spacecraft, and yeah, so you'll have
Golly.
the medical personnel enter the spacecraft, check out the astronauts, make sure everyone's okay. If anyone is not okay, then they will get immediate attention and they'll probably come out first. But they have lots of plans in place, so they'll have multiple medics go in, check out the astronauts. They have a sequence of which astronaut comes out with the spacecraft first, in part because of the positions of their seats, and then those astronauts they'll be picked up by helicopter and transported. So
Whoa.
It'll take a little time. They'll move cautiously with every single step. But I would imagine it's not going to take that full 2 hours.
Alan is in.
Jesus. 2 hours.
About something that since we landed on the moon and came back safely a whole bunch of different times, how come they had to change the rocket and the technology? How come we couldn't just use the old technology since it didn't work?
That is a great question.
Preach, boy. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
The technology of the Apollo era was absolutely extraordinary. The Saturn V rocket was magnificent and flew successfully again and again and again. What ended up happening, though, is when that program closed, the ability to manufacture a lot of those elements that contributed to the rocket or the different parts of the Apollo hardware were no longer being produced. And so we have information about how they were built, but many of the people working on the program went on to work in different areas. And the manufacturing didn't consistently continue to make those parts. And so you could return to that Saturn V design, or you could return to the Apollo command module design and then add some updates. But it makes a lot more sense today, given industry that we draw on and the expertise at NASA and the contractor workforce to develop something that's new. And so with the Artemis program, there are a lot of lessons learned from previous programs. You'll see some of the Apollo tech.
Where did the parachutes go? And are they going to dig them up out of the ocean and discard them? Because there are animals in the ocean, is the next question I would ask.
That is that
They better look for and retrieve all those gigantic parachutes that I no longer see.
You know, if you look at shuttle engines, or if you look at Saturn V engines, or if you look at what happened on Artemis, there's so much in common. But there are
And they better make sure no animals were caught in it when they're pulling it out.
So, you know, they always say the story. What is it about the ability of the technology they had in Apollo is now like your phone or something like that on something that.
Oh yes, I hear this. You're watching I think it's not the right way to interpret the significance of the Apollo computer, which just revolutionized computing in this country. I mean, it was a big of the reason we have these watches and these phones is thanks to the Apollo program. So yes, the technology is different. Computing power has come a long, long way. So there are lots of reasons that we wouldn't use the same technology we did in the 1960s, but it's also that manufacturing issue is a big part of the story as well.
Well, so like when we first started with the Orion capsule, they did a couple of mock-ups of it. So you could go down to Johnson Space Center, you go in the capsule, and they had taken shuttle avionics, computer systems, and put them in there as placeholders. And they were so gigantic looking because the technology of the 70s and computer world still, it took a lot of heavy duty stuff to be able to compute. And so when you see the capsule now and you see
there it is. There's the Uber.
And the reliability and the safety of the systems now can be built in by computers. You know, again, it might have to me
right there. Yay!
As reliable and safe as possible. I think now we
Their Uber is here.
stay safe during these missions. So
Still waiting for the crew to emerge. There's the capsule right there. Jeff Wilson, what's involved in collecting the capsule from this? What's the protocol?
yeah, so again, they'll have divers go out. First thing, I guess they're going to look around the capsule to make sure.
Whoa, it's super wobbly.
So take samples to make sure there's nothing coming off the capsule. Again, it has thrusters that have hydrazine, so if there's any fuel leak or anything like that, once they do that, the ship is going to come forward.
They won't retrieve it. They'll leave it in the ocean. The
And I think we saw this
The fuel.
the ship and put it inside. So yeah, again, while they're out there, they're checking the crew, but they're also checking the capsule environment to know that it's going to be safe to bring on board the ship.
Same protocol from back in the Apollo systems when their capsule was reclaimed.
So some additional details. So the sampling of the water, I have not heard or been aware of this. What I think Artemis they're calling the smell test.
Yeah.
But the concerns about the spacecraft sort of with other material that comes along with it. There were lots of other protocols, and for the Apollo program, it depended on what mission you're talking about. So during like Apollo 11, for instance, there was some concern that the astronauts and the spacecraft might be coming back with some.
Can they wash their hair in space?
There were a lot of quarantine protocols in place in recovering the astronauts and recovering the spacecraft. That was only in place for a few missions, and so later missions they could retrieve the astronauts more immediately. They didn't have to wear what they call these biological isolation garments and do the decontamination process. But in many ways, it's very similar. It was a smaller crew that approached the spacecraft during the Apollo era than you see today.
Let's go to Tony. Tony in West Virginia. Hi there. You're on with our guest.
Hey, thank you so much. I will turn 75 this summer, and I've been watching from Mercury to Gemini to Apollo,
Whoa.
probably because of my interest in the space program. And
Sounds pretty young.
the space program through teaching it, and I was a Christy McCullough Fellow. The coverage that has been provided for the public has been absolutely amazing. Of what I'm seeing on my TV is so crystal clear. This has just been wonderful. Thank you to everybody, and
Yeah. Go Navy.
Artemis to Apollo. This is a unifying moment, I imagine.
Yeah.
Despite where you stand on certain lot of things, it's a unifying moment, and you probably saw that in Apollo's history, and you see that now. So
yeah, it's been amazing to see, and there've been some immediate public opinion polls from this past week trying to gauge a sense of how the public is feeling about this mission.
The boats just passed it by.
Is that off the charts to see it? I think it's like over.
My two questions would be, can you wash your hair in space?
You know,
And are they going to carefully retrieve all the parachutes and check them for any fish that may have been caught in them?
Usually between 60 and 70%. But support of lunar exploration and the Artemis program now is also bumped up to 69% of the American public in a poll conducted last week. So you really see a lot of enthusiasm and people coming together. And with those percentages, yeah, it's not it's everyone, right? That's a broad swath of the country really enthusiastic about lunar exploration.
and for someone who's been inside NASA, some sort of perspective too.
Inside NASA or outside NASA. Just 6 months ago, if you ask people about Artemis, people be like, I don't understand. What are you talking about? And it's like almost as the mission got really close, people were for so long. I think that from a public standpoint, there were people who followed it. There were people who loved NASA, but I think for the public at large, nobody believed it would actually happen someday. So I think as Artemis got really close to launching, it's like, holy mackerel, this is real, and real astronauts are going to go off on this thing. So I've been excited because even my students, some of them knew a little bit about the mission, but it's like this is about putting it together. So all of a sudden, you know their names, you know the backgrounds of the astronauts, you know the mission profile, you know what kind of science they're doing. And so I think the excitement level just kind of ramped up really quickly in those last couple of weeks of leaving along.
Let's go to calls. Or unless you want something to add something.
Man, those people must be dying to come out.
You're on. Go ahead.
Things, missions like this are the first step towards moving from the Mars.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good question. So I think we've debated, should we go back to the moon or should we go directly to Mars with humans? We've sent a lot of robots to Mars. We found some really interesting rocks.
Robots.
There was past life and there was potential water on the surface. So I think there's a lot of interest in someday getting humans to go to Mars. But the one thing to kind of think about is it's been so long since Apollo. Humans have been orbiting the Earth for many years, but it's been a long time since we've actually left the Earth environment and got all the way to the moon, which is 250,000 miles away or so. But the idea of going to Mars, 50 million miles away, where the journey for the crew will take years from the time they blast off to the time they come back.
Not far, huh?
And so that'll be super exciting. But just seeing that we now have the capability to get astronauts back to the moon and leave the Earth environment, we're learning a lot.
I mean, if it already happened, what's the big deal?
But for right now, this is exciting that we're at least.
Yeah, I don't know why we keep going to the moon.
I think that one aspect of the Artemis program that's so exciting is it's opening up future possibilities. So more will be possible in future exploration because of this mission and what we learned from this mission. And with the Apollo program, it really had a very definitive goal, which was send humans to the moon, land them there, and return them safely back to Earth. It didn't have this plan of long term exploration. It had this very short, near term plan within less than a decade. And so what you see is you see a lot of shift and a refocus at NASA to different destinations after the Apollo program. Artemis is different in the sense that it's opening up the future to more possibilities. And the expectation is that is going to include exploring Mars someday.
Is in a sense that this mission ends, but even as it automatically ends, it's the next step of taking whatever we've learned and moved it to Artemis 3. Is that the idea? And is that how these programs work? You just move on to the next thing right away.
Yeah, well, NASA's already been working on Artemis 3, so there's these missions are really overlapping and how they're working on them. They will take lessons from Artemis 2 and apply them to Artemis 3 and Artemis 4. But there's already a lot of activity going on in planning these next subsequent missions. The expectation now is they're going to happen in quick succession. And so you'll get maybe perhaps more of that momentum in terms of public engagement you saw during the Apollo program because these missions, the expectation is they're going to be happening quite frequently. During the Apollo era, you have all those Apollo missions between 68 and 72. So multiple missions a year, really a lot to follow. But with Artemis 2, it is going to feed into the next mission and it's going to feed the knowledge gained here is going to feed into many future flights.
Suppose in the data they take in, what happens with that? What are they looking at? What they take it in to see what they're going to use it for in the future?
Sure. Well, so I think right now, so the administrators laid out a really great plan. So we want to be flying these missions more often, as Teasel said. We want to fly more robotic missions to the moon as well. Keep that cadence up, keep learning, keep improving. So that's where the data goes, right? The data goes back to a bunch of engineers who are going to say, that looked like it was flawless to us watching the TV, but it wasn't exactly flawless, right? Whether it was the toilet or anything else, just along the way. And future crews will be able to take advantage. And I think Christina was interviewed at one point about the value of this mission and what was the most important part. And she said that every day, everything they do, they're thinking about how are we getting ready for the next mission? How are we going to help that next crew when they go off on their mission? So whether it's the data collected or the crew's experience, a lot of that will get folded in. And we haven't done this in so long. These will now be our experts on how to go to the moon and come back.
Artemis 2's 4 astronauts traveled farther from Earth and closer to the moon than any human in over 50 years. Artemis 2 is the first crewed flight test of the Space Launch System rocket and Orion capsule.
The moon. Just imagine when they go into these deep craters that are permanently shadowed and try to find water ice that might have been put there by comets, a couple billion years ago. That's going to be pretty darn exciting.
There are the helicopters.
We'll be able to watch that live. We'll be able to see what the astronauts are doing.
3 helicopters.
Great for kind of building that inspiration and having people kind of ride along. So as Mars is exciting for me as well, but I think what we're going to be doing on the moon is going to be pretty darn exciting too.
News from the USS John Murtha as the crew get weights to be recovered, as well as the capsule part of our coverage on C-SPAN of today's Artemis 2 splashdown. You can continue to call and talk with our guests, ask questions about the mission, how it affects future missions, and things you've seen. The numbers will be on your screen. Jeff Wilson, as far as the waiting now, when it comes to the astronauts themselves, you talked a little bit about how they'll be looked at, but do they just sit and relax, or are they required to do anything at this point?
Sit and relax.
For sure, they're going to be having a lot of data taken by the medical team about their current state of health. And again, one of the things that they want to do is, as quickly as possible, fully debrief them. Not only do a medical examination to see what the effects of 9 days in space were, but they also want them to just talk. Give us your impressions. They've been doing that throughout the mission, but this is their final opportunity. While it's still really fresh in their mind, they get a chance to engage with crew. So I'm not sure. Is there other stuff they might be doing on?
A lot of it is just getting from point A to point B at this point, I believe, and so it's making sure that everyone is in good condition, and then transferring them as quickly as possible, just to move on to the next step. So I don't believe that there's
Johnson Space Center better evaluation as soon as they can.
In Michigan, that's where Bill is in Grand Haven.
They can.
In Michigan, that's where Bill is in Grand Haven. Hello, Bill.
Damn,
Go
they're
ahead.
just letting them sit there.
Come back and the re-entry.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that it gets much above the 70s in the capsule. They're trying to throughout this mission. Did you watch like early on? They were awfully cold, and so again, they're doing stuff that people haven't done in a really long time. So they're learning like how does the thermal system work? Okay, we got to turn the capsule a little bit. Now we could get this capsule heated up a little bit. At some point, it was getting too warm, and they asked them to either pull the blinds down or lift the blinds up. So I think throughout this mission, they've been going through periods where it gets a little cooler, but we're talking like it gets into the lower 60s. And then they make some adjustments and it gets into the 70s. So I think at no point in the mission do you ever want to see the heat rising inside the capsule or falling dramatically. So as hot as it is outside at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, they're trying to keep them in kind of a room temperature environment.
NASA tells us that the
5,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
recovery. Good news. I mentioned
5,500.
Yes, that's true, and it's not always the case in every single mission. So there have been examples where the crew was exposed to some fumes inside the spacecraft. This happened with the Apollo-Soyuz test project when that Apollo crew came back to Earth, and so they actually had to be hospitalized for a bit of time for their mission. So things can go wrong, and for the most part, these splashdowns have gone very, very well, and the crew is in good health, and it's great. It's just wonderful to see that it's true in this case.
Yeah, we've experimented for so long. I'm watching this thing bobbing around the ocean. So in the early days of Orion, we thought, let's land it on land, because then we don't need to have the Navy go out. And we tried all kinds of like accordion fleets, like a Soyuz, and all kinds of way to fire a retro rocket right before you land. And in the end, it was like, it's just way better to land in the ocean and just have the Navy go out and get it. So you want to save, if you can, the time and expense of sending the Navy out to pick it up. But it makes this design work just perfectly.
the orange balloons on top. Is that a location device of some type, or
Talk about that because that
There's for flotation.
To make the vessel to ensure
In case something happens.
So for some mission, and this was the same technology used during the Apollo program, actually. So these are flotation devices, and if you come to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum or Utvar Hazy Center, you can see the Apollo 11 flotation devices. But what happens is that if it is a day with high waves or something like that, the spacecraft can actually be flipped upside down, and you see that the top of the cone could be bottom down in the water. It's called a stable two position. It's completely fine. But what then ends up happening is they release these flotation devices. It rights the spacecraft into the right direction. During the Apollo era, they'd also add something called a collar, so another flotation device that went around the spacecraft. They're not doing that with Artemis, but there's a lot of similar technology. It worked during Apollo, and it's working today.
Yes, we're talking about. They do call it stable 1 and stable 2. If I'm the crew, I do not want
Stable 2 is upside down.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, so you
That would be stable 2.
sitting on their backs, basically. And so in that the wide part of the capsule, that's where their backs are facing. So if it's if it's
So they're facing up right now.
the nose of the capsule, you want to get
It's a stable situation. So yeah, nose in.
From Cole in Texas. Hi there.
And other than that, I got one question. What is racing going and mission?
If you ask if they were afraid to go on the mission.
Yeah.
Okay. Good question.
No, they're not afraid.
Well, I think that if you are an astronaut, you probably don't experience the same type of fear that the average person might in this type of mission. You've trained for it. This is what you want to do. You have a lot of enthusiasm for this type of exploration, and you're the kind of person that's really willing to take a lot of risk in your life. And so, my sense, I've not heard any of these astronauts talk about being afraid. And I can tell you back in the early space age, the Apollo 8 mission, which this one's often compared to, the wife of one of the astronauts was told there's a 50-50 chance that this is going to be a success. So throughout time, astronauts have really taken on these challenges. They're comfortable with risk, and they tend not to be too afraid, especially if the mission goes this well.
But I think to your point, it's the training, right? It's that they're training and training and training for good situations, for bad situations, and that training gets them ready. I think there's always apprehension and nervousness. I was nervous to come back here and talk to you guys again. So that was being an astronaut. Yeah. So, but I think that's what happens is they get so well trained and they are the right temperament of person because in a situation that goes bad, you need someone who will stay calm.
Yeah, they undergo a lot of testing. Would you pick these people up, please? They gotta pee.
Handful that are ready to do this kind of job.
Sorry, there's a funny story from the first human spaceflight, Yuri Gagarin. So this was going to be the first time humans went in space. So can you imagine how nervous most people would be? And supposedly he got a good night's sleep before his mission. So they had detectors on his bed to see how much he was moving. He slept soundly, and then he rode the first rocket into space as a human. So it really, to become an astronaut, you have to be up for the challenge and the risks involved. And so, yes, as Jeff was saying, the selection process does treat that aspect of space exploration.
Service program was talking about how we've seen video of the crew all week just doing things in and out, and he used the word chill. They were during that. What or even previous how just calm they were in the day-to-day activity, especially since most of us were seeing them doing it every day.
These are people who are calm under pressure. They're extremely well trained for this mission. And they also have a lot of training that they come with. So
and they're tested on all of that. Their character, demeanor.
That takes a lot of training. That's relatively risky.
Psychologically tested.
And probably a fair amount of experience overcoming challenges in the past, and then they can take that and to sort of stay cool under pressure.
Yeah, and I think the thing that freaked me out the whole time was whenever they were like spinning around in the cabin, and I'm like, okay, that would make me so sick. But for them, it was like, oh, let me show you how you can pirouette around in here.
Sleeping in the cones or various good. Let's go to Stephen. Stephen in Tennessee. Hi there. Good. Go ahead, you're on.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys bringing me on. I've got a question that relates between the space shuttle and the Artemis 2, or actually the Artemis program. I remember from memory the TPS, or the high purity silica fiber. I think it was called.
Try to do. But for right now, it's not feasible. So this Apollo heat shield style worked really well for coming back. They went with that, and you're going to tell me that they're coming up to next.
Yay! Finally.
So as far as go back to winged vehicles, I think there are programs looking at using winged vehicles to come back through the atmosphere. Sierra Nevada is developing a small cargo spaceship that will have a wing profile that should be launching in the next year or so. But I think we found that
Oh man, they psyched them out
for getting crew in and out of the atmosphere. And so We want to put the technology somewhere else, like in lunar bases and lunar landers. And so I think as long as this shape works, we're probably going to stick with it for a while.
It looks like they're getting ready to do something. One circling and
They're
another.
flotilla.
Yeah.
So,
Walk us through that. What
Let's
what-
go.
yeah, can you see it? Oh yeah, is that the porch coming up?
No,
There's something close to them now. Is it just one of the boats?
it looks
Yeah,
like
it's a boat.
Or like a motorized raft.
The first one. They elected them to go in first.
They were like, you
Okay.
first, you first.
Well, and there we are, ladies and gentlemen, the audience there.
Let's go.
Artists, to capsule, the Orion
Those
capsule.
poor people landed so
So
long ago.
reported
Just
very
sitting there.
well when it comes to how they're doing. Over the next hours or so, not only will the crew be claimed and taken back, but the capsule as well. Our guest here to talk about it and answer your questions about it. So what are we looking for now? The next steps will be just everybody coming in to do what they have to do, or is it?
Yeah, so we talked about before the sniff test or whatever it is. So
Smell
that's-
test.
That is the
Sniff
closest that we've
test.
seen so far, right? So that might be the team that's doing that at last assessment, that it is okay to come over. And as Diesel mentioned before, the porch will be the next thing, right? So we're gonna be waiting to see that, and once you see that, you're gonna see the door opening, right? That's when they're gonna start to try to get the crew out.
Let's
And the
go.
next
These
step is
poor
going inside the
people.
spacecraft before they start helping the crew come out of the spacecraft.
They're
So you'll
GoProing
see
them.
and
Now
do
they're
the
doing a
spacecraft,
smell
check
test.
things out. So it'll take a little bit of time before we'll see the astronauts actually coming out of the spacecraft.
As we watch, let's hear from Lois. Lois in Alaska. Hi there. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Lois. Thank you for taking my call. I'm sitting here.
They're
at the
doing a
Girl
smell
Scout I
test.
had, over 50 years ago when I broke the Girl Scout camp rules and brought an electronic device so my girls at camp could actually sit and watch landing on the moon. Now I'm sitting here speaking on behalf of all teachers that this is why we tell you when you ask us, why do I need my algebra? Why do I need to know? This is why you need to know it, because if we all, as the astronauts have been talking about, if we all do this together, look at what we can do as a united group using all of our talents within each of us.
That's Lois there in Alaska. Thanks.
Oh no, they're going away.
I definitely think that is worth breaking some rules to be able to listen to the moon landing. I'm so glad you did that for you
To
and
watch
the
it.
fellow Girl Scouts, was it? That must have been a really special memory. And I love the sentiment you shared about this is what's possible when we all work together. And this is something we saw. Kennedy talked about it as this measures the best of our abilities. It's just absolutely thrilling to see what can be achieved by humans when they work together, when they bring their talent and expertise to a problem.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned, like when you said about algebra, it's like a lot of my students or students I talk to in like high schools say, well, I'd like to work at NASA, but I'm really not good at algebra. I'm really not good at math. I don't think I'll make it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the thousands of people that worked on Artemis, not every one of them is great at math, right? So there are all kinds of people with all kinds of skill sets that are needed to make something like this happen. So that's
Preach.
really the focus. If you have a passion to work in the space program, you'll find your niche and that works best for you.
I mean, because we focus on the 4 astronauts.
Yeah,
but
stop trying to get us to learn
there's
math,
thousands
teacher.
behind everything, and I suppose
We don't all want to be astronauts.
Yes, exactly. And so
He's saying we could still get a job at NASA, even if we're bad at math.
Welders and the designers, but you also need people in communications who are helping share this information with a broader public. And within the larger space world, there are so many different ways to be a part of it. So there's space policy and space law. There's government relations. There's business. So there are lots of different ways. It's always good to learn algebra. It's always good to work hard in school in all of your classes. But you don't necessarily need to be an engineer. You don't necessarily need to be able to build a rocket to participate in this. And that's one of the really exciting things about spaceflight is there are so many different ways to engage and support this kind of mission.
Yeah, in fact, for a lot of the missions I've worked on, sometimes it's like the lead for the budget.
If you guys watch Space Force on Netflix, it's a funny show with Steve Carell, the guy, Michael Scott from The Office. And it didn't even get a season 2, but it's so funny. I can't believe it didn't get a season 2. You guys should watch that. It's called Space Force.
Yeah, I've been so impressed by how teams coming together. And I've worked on smaller missions. I've never worked on something the scale of Artemis, but I can imagine how many people for the last 4 or 5 years have dedicated their lives and worked long hours to make this moment happen.
Claire joins us from Colorado. Good afternoon. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I was wondering if anyone goes out to pick up the parachutes and the other material.
That's what I said.
Yes,
That's
that
what I
all was
asked.
recovered, and it all was recovered before. And I, as a museum curator, I'm very grateful for that because I have those Apollo parachutes in my collection, and they're stunning still to this day.
After the engineers looked at those.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So all of it will get evaluated and recorded, and lessons learned for future missions. But then they have other uses, including
Where are they right
getting
now,
people
though?
excited about spaceflight, being able to look at them up close. So hopefully someday people can look at these parachutes, see them up close, remember watching the mission, and have that personal connection.
Yeah, you had said last time that they should take the capsule and put it on a train and take it around the country. I think we agreed to that. They could take the parachutes and everything. I think that'd be a great way to
What
kind
is
of
that?
expose more people to
Looks
this.
like it's on.
Is the capsule dragged back to the ship? Is it put on another ship? How does that work?
Come over to it. I
Okay.
think they'll put a winch on it or
Looks like
something.
a
to get the pull.
flare is
But the ship will
heading
come to
towards
it.
the cabin.
Okay. And as well
On the
as the
water?
analysis of
Look
the
at
ship
that.
itself, is that months? Is that years? What's the
What is
process
that?
of taking a look at everything after it's done?
Yeah, like
It will depend on what it will tell us. And so for the Artemis 1 spacecraft, for instance, it has been evaluated much longer because of those issues with the heat shield. And so NASA's maintained it and used it as a source of information to ensure that Artemis 2 and future missions are going to be safe. If once there's they're done with the spacecraft, it doesn't take too long to learn from it. There's this potential that it could go on exhibit. I love the idea of it following the Apollo 11 command module and touring all 50 state capitals. I think that would be really exciting. It would be a very fun tour, especially for the 250th celebration for this country. And so we'll see what happens, and it'll really just depend on how much information that NASA needs to gather from the spacecraft and how long that takes.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and if I understand right, you have first dibs, right?
No,
How does that work?
no longer. So yeah, well, this back in the 1960s, the Smithsonian and NASA came to an agreement because NASA realized, this is an agency building things, studying this is not an agency about preservation, and so NASA connected with the Smithsonian, and so the Smithsonian helped shepherd all the hardware after it was no longer needed. Collected a huge number of items from Apollo and then subsequent missions, but it's different today. So NASA has opened up the ability to access these artifacts to the broader community. So you put in your proposal, and you gotta have a winning proposal.
NASA is
actually making contact.
an agency of
capsule
building,
now. That's the
not
one shot. If
preserving.
You revert to the other shot they were showing just a few
So
seconds
they
ago,
share their
they're
stuff
trying
with
to
the
open up
Smithsonian
the
Museum.
So, again, that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen, as we look at
Which that's on my
post-
bucket list to
events
visit the Smithsonian
when it comes to,
Museum.
Artemis 2. And we'll watch this play out, especially as the medics go in and examine
Finally,
the crew.
jeez, are they
There's
opening
from
it?
there, seeing
Jesus,
the
would you
ship as
crack
well as
that
the
door
capsule.
open?
Taking the ship. Let's go to Gavin. Gavin in New York. Hi. You're on. Go ahead.
See, there's like a flare going across the water.
So it's a really good question. So when I was a kid, we weren't sure. And so it was really Apollo that helped us learn by bringing back all those valuable rocks, right? So I think at the beginning, when I was a kid, we learned
It's
that
made
it was
of
probably,
dust.
something flying by the Earth that kind of got trapped in the Earth's gravity, and that's where it came from. But it's an awfully big moon. Like compared to any other planet in the solar system, it's a really large moon. It's a quarter the size of our planet, which is unusual.
Open
to
the
have a moon
door,
that big. So
please.
that's theories today, based on the Apollo rocks that have come back and everything like that, is that it actually was part of the Earth. That somewhere billions of years ago, something the size of Mars ran into the Earth and knocked off a bunch of rock.
Yes,
All that
everybody
rock
wants you to pick them up in the
conglomerated
comments.
space and got caught in the Earth's gravity.
Let's
and we
go,
have a moon
Navy.
that's really large. And so Nobody will ever turn the clock back to know exactly, but that's our best theory of where that comes from.
And so moon rocks are very, very similar to Earth rocks for this reason. So there are a few differences. So they're missing some of the volatiles, but for the most part, it's the same material that you find here on Earth, except on Earth that we have many other things as well. But moon rocks and Earth rocks are quite similar.
Tiso, your Harmony, we talked about the physical aspects of astronaut coming back, but what?
I want
how
a
does he
moon
react,
rock.
Or she react after it's all done? What does history tell us as far as post mission and when it's completed, how you decompress from that?
There's been a large range of ways that these astronauts respond to the experience of coming home. It's actually quite fascinating because you would think there would be some more consistency and how that experience affects people. It is a profound experience. I think it does change people's lives, but it has.
It looks like they're trying to get close enough to open
There's
it.
no exact way to predict what will happen. There's not as much consistency as
This
you might think.
transmission
There's an
isn't
interesting
great,
book
and I
about this
can't
called,
believe it. I
Limits
thought
Called
we'd have the
Paradox.
technology already
If
to
you're
make
interested
these
in the
images
topic, but
clearer.
I imagine these astronauts immediately will want to see their families, be so appreciative of being back on Earth. The sort of immediate experience that astronauts have tends to be an appreciation for planet Earth. Just really being so thrilled to be back, to have smells again.
With other humans.
To have gravity and all that familiarity that
That's
comes
right,
along with
smells.
it. And then after that, it's a
Guess they
process
don't
of
have
readjusting
smells
to
up
life
there?
on Earth
What?
after experiencing something so
They can't smell
out
anything?
of this world, and very literally.
In,
So
in the
it'll be
spaceship,
interesting
at
to see, but really
least?
there isn't actually that much consistency in how the astronauts have
Would you
responded.
open the door?
I think, these
Open the door!
have the experience they just had. They're not talking about leaving the astronaut corps, so they may be candidates to go back to the moon on another mission. So I don't know that any of them are thinking this is their last mission. There are lots of other astronauts waiting for that opportunity, but yeah, they have this incredible experience to build
Do
on.
they get to move to head to the line or when it comes to that?
That's up to the crew, team, office, and how they make selections. That's a
The astronauts probably not, but they may work at NASA in part also to then contribute the
Well, they
knowledge that
must
gain,
get priority.
on their mission. And
Oh, they're gonna
there's
be
been history of
famous.
some astronauts wanting to stay in the astronaut corps for a while, even if they don't fly again. And some astronauts who, after their mission, they immediately leave. And pursue other types of careers. So Michael Collins is a great example. So on his return to Earth after the Apollo 11 mission, he told President Nixon that he wanted to work for the State Department and become a diplomat. And so that's what he ended up doing.
Again, there's another shot that capsule there.
I guess you get to pick whatever job you want. Nice. Well deserved.
no, again, I think this is
These are highly intelligent people.
The capsule safe to approach. Talking to the crew inside,
Good
right? So there's
people.
communication probably between them and the crew, just making sure that everything is safe to approach. And again,
They
they're gonna
seem to be
getting ready
well
to
grounded.
bring it looks like they're
No
getting
pun
right up against it,
intended.
so they're going to be opening the door soon and getting the porch over. But yeah, I think this is just the initial assessment crew.
Let's watch that and let's hear from Jill. Jill in North Carolina. Hi there.
They seem to be down to earth
Jill in North
people.
Carolina.
See what I did there?
Let's go to Kira. Kira is in Idaho. Hi, Kira. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Thank you, first of all, so much for letting people call in and do this. But so I had heard that when Argus 2 launched, they had brought up, I believe, it was a piece of the Wright brothers plane and the American flag that was supposed to be on Apollo 18. But my question is, did they also happen to bring anything up that was part of Challenger or Columbia?
Here we go.
That's a great question. I have not heard about them bringing anything from Challenger or Columbia. I know that
They're opening it. Looks like.
NASA reached out to me, and it had internal discussions as well, and then with some of my colleagues at the Smithsonian, what might make sense. I know NASA really wanted to bring something from the Apollo 18 mission that never was. So the last moon landing mission was Apollo 17.
Did they open
But
it?
there was material that was already made for Apollo 18, and so.
And how would they fit on that
they
boat?
wanted
It's
to
so
ensure that
crowded.
They connected this mission to that mission that never happened, and so they really focused on finding something related to Apollo 18. But I don't believe they brought anything from.
Doors open. Let's listen in.
Yes. There should be something to hold the boat together with the pod.
On the boat here, glued to the side closest to where they can see all this action. And again, with
So
just
bumpy.
3,000 yards separating us, great views from the bow here. You can see now that side hatch is open. One of the Navy personnel is about to get inside there. In they go. In total, 4 will go into Orion. So it'll be a little bit of a tight squeeze, but the goal is to have a recovery personnel with each astronaut assessing them.
In there? That's crazy. So 4 people are gonna go into the pod. That's crazy. I thought they were gonna do it on the boat and assess them on the boat.
Boats getting closer now. Again, that one that's right up against Orion, those are the divers that will go in to the spacecraft to check on each of the astronauts. These other
Are they
boats
medical
going into
divers?
putting on that stabilization collar onto Orion.
Doctor
building that front
divers?
Porch. Eventually, they will retrieve the parachutes, as well as tow Orion back to the well deck of the recovery ship here.
So cool. These guys look like they're gonna fall off that little boat.
And
That
so
Navy
we wait
boat.
for the Navy and NASA personnel to
They look like they're
get
half
their
in the water.
assessment of the crew inside of Orion. Why don't we toss it back to Rob for an update?
Yes, thank you, Megan. Here in Mission Control, Flight Director Rick Henfling and the entry team of flight controllers still on duty. The vehicle has been powered down for some time now. There are no hazardous gases emanating from integrity. That, of course, allowed the recovery personnel to approach the vehicle and then open the hatch to begin the initial medical assessment of the crew, as you just indicated. Now we're standing by for the erection of that inflatable raft, the front porch, alongside of the vehicle that will enable the crew to be extracted one by one onto the raft, have a moment or two to get their land legs back before they're hoisted into 2 hovering Navy helicopters. 2 crew
Oh
members from
wow.
each
They're not even
helicopter
going into
for
the
a short
boat.
flight back to the deck of the USS John P. Murtha.
Man, they should have brought the ship
All of
closer.
Integrity's systems operated flawlessly throughout the course of the approach to the Earth, the entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and all of the key milestones that followed in this high-speed return to Earth for Integrity. A mission that spanned more than 694,000 miles from the vehicle's launch from the Kennedy Space Center atop the Space Launch System back on April 1st.
We had circling boats. Now they're much closer, as NASA tells us. The erection of this front porch about to happen. Things moving at a brisk pace. A lot of people involved in this operation. I'm going to tease with your Harmony. You were telling me about the frogmen, so to speak, involved in this, those who are in the water. Tell us the story.
Yeah, well, it was great. I got an email today from one of the frogmen who helped recover the Apollo 11 crew. And so recently I had done this program with them, a podcast for the Airspace podcast that the Smithsonian puts out. And it's such a fun interview because they give some really rich details about what it was like to recover that Apollo 11 crew. And one of them, John Wolfram, who reached out to me today, he shared some pictures from that time So if you watch the splashdown, you might remember there was one frogman. He had a wetsuit when he had flower decals on it. It really stood out. He was told he might get in trouble if he decided to do that. But he really wanted to signal this was a peaceful celebration. You have to remember it's 1969. It's so fascinating because with Apollo 11 and the USS Hornet, which was their recovery vehicle, it had just done a few tours of duty in Vietnam. So this was a boat full of active military soldiers who had been part of the war most recently. They expected they were going to be, I think, coming home for a break, and then they got this announcement that they are going to be helping recover the Apollo 11 crew. So they stayed at sea longer and they trained. But the frogmen, their background is in dealing with underwater detonation devices, I believe. And so they're really highly skilled, trained military personnel who can deal with very dangerous situations. This must have been something somewhat different, but they can deal with challenging issues in the water. And so it's just so much fun to see that image again of the wetsuit with the flower decals and that kind of celebratory nature. Another fun detail is that back in Apollo 11, as you can see, it takes a little while for these activities to play out. And so the crew had been recovered and then they had to stay with the spacecraft for a little while. And so they ended up playing King of the Capsule. And so they were trying to like climb the capsule, knock each other off. They were having a good time in the water. And then eventually the spacecraft went back to the aircraft carrier.
So that there are new screens are the recovery process on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side, that watch party that's taking place at San Diego Air and Space Museum, part of C-SPAN's coverage when it comes to today's splashdown. You've been hearing from two guests, Tizon Muir Harmony, who we just heard from the National Air and Space Museum. She's the curator of their Apollo collection. Jeff Velosin with Capital Technology University has had several posts at NASA involving space flight. While we're waiting for the crew to emerge, we've had a week of big events. Standout. Well, what was the standout moment? Is one standout moment?
Yeah, so you said I used to work at NASA. So my last job was the head of the communications group, right? So
They opened the hatch, but they're still not out.
It's out.
So
Yeah.
The two questions I would ask them is like,
and up at Lincoln Laboratory in
what are they gonna do with that suit?
Massachusetts,
Just leave it in sea?
No, they're gonna tow it in.
And so this
And also, how are they gonna tow it? Like what?
Yeah, I honestly I thought a big ship would go and crane pick it up. But that's not how. Apparently, from the sound of it, they're gonna tow it, like hook it onto one of the boats and tow it back to shore.
He's got all kinds of things to worry
From the
about.
sound of it.
Because they really want this demonstration about optimal communication to worry about as well. But in the end, it worked
That's
out really
okay.
well. They had
This is gonna stay on the channel
They were
forever.
trying to get it to
We
communicate
can
back
watch
over
it back.
maybe the solar panels.
No, because I feel like you're just talking to air, like you're.
I'm talking for the existence of this live, which anyone can
It was
watch.
the pride in the work that those people have done at Goddard and up at Lincoln to build a machine to be able to.
Like if he didn't say Uber for Johnny when he opened that door, I'm gonna be so mad.
Was hearing those messages from the Apollo astronauts to the crew. I thought it was so thoughtful and beautiful that they had recorded those messages to share with the crew. And Jim Lovell, for instance, who has passed away recently, recorded it before he passed away, knew that this mission was going to be happening, was really excited about it, and connecting the accomplishments of Apollo with Artemis in that way, I thought was quite moving.
And there were a lot of those emotional moments, right? Like, so when the crew discussed the naming of the craters, right? And they decided to propose name a crater after the commander's wife and so late wife. And so, yeah, there were a lot of those moments where I think it really brought everyone together emotionally at a moment. And I think maybe in the past, I don't know how it was in Apollo, my impression as a kid was NASA tried to make them kind of just seem
You can
like
see
these silly
someone.
figures a little bit more. Where I think we got a lot of views of the Artemis crew being very original and very human.
I think part of that is because we got much more access to this crew than we did in the past, right? And so the Apollo astronauts did do playful things in space. They had fun little signs and they played music and they did so you could say hand it up in front of the camera. I mean they had a good time depending on who it was and who the crew was. They did show that side of themselves, but for most of the mission, the public didn't get access to what was happening inside the spacecraft. They didn't have access to those sort of downtime moments that we got with the Artemis crew. So you didn't get as much familiarity with how the crew was interacting, how they were playful with each other. This was just much more access to what it means to travel to the moon and familiarity with this crew and their working together.
At some point, I felt sorry for the crew because I felt like they had to do so many interviews over the course of these 9 days with people asking similar questions, right? We all have the same interest. And so I thought, boy, they always seemed enthusiastic and engaged. And I'm like, boy, it's got to be tough for 9 days to be doing that.
Although I highly recommend listening to that press conference where it's children across Canada asking questions. I love that one. They ask different questions. Kids often ask really thoughtful, fantastic questions that don't get asked by everyone else. And so that is a very fun and really great questions. And I'm sure the crew appreciated all those questions coming from across Canada.
President Trump sending out something on his Truth Social site about today's events. It says, congratulations to the great and very talented crew of Artemis 2. The entire trip was spectacular. The landing was perfect. And as President of the United States, I could not be more proud. I look forward to seeing you at the White House soon. We'll be doing it again. And then next step, Mars, President Donald J. Trump. I imagine every president gets a chance to make remarks at this similar at these kind of times.
Yes, I think this is a tweet or a True Social post, social media post is something a little different than you would have seen in the past, but definitely. So for the Apollo 8 crew, President Johnson called them once they got to the recovery craft, and for the Apollo 11 landing, President Nixon met them there at the craft to speak with them. So yes, there's this long history of presidents calling the astronauts, meeting with the astronauts, congratulating them first thing as soon as they return home.
And he brought up Mars. Was that an interesting point to all that?
I think many people in the space program are perfectly excited he brought up Mars. That sort of confirmation that he's supportive of that as a goal. I think there are probably.
He tried to take away their funding.
Well,
Didn't he already try to take away their funding?
Calling in, those will be the people who will get us to Mars, right? Those 8-year-olds that are calling in.
Yeah, that's right.
The agency to Mars, because it'll be a while, right? Before we establish lunar presence, we get all of that working well. It's going to be those who are 8 years old who are going to be 30 or 40. And they're going to build on Artemis and go to Mars.
So do you
I don't think it'll take that long, but
well, yeah, because of the real.
It'll be a couple years.
I have friends who have worked on going back to the moon my whole career, right? So you got to remember, I started in 1989 with the thought of going back to the moon when the first George Bush said we were going back to the moon. So I was in that office, and one of the things we had back then was all the Apollo astronauts coming to visit and all the Apollo teams. And one of the things they said is, "You guys will never do it. You're full of bureaucracy now. We were young and agile, and we made things happen." And now, at the end of my career,
There's
I'm like,
more bureaucracy now.
almost right. And now this happens. And you're like, okay, it took us a little longer, and we had to do a little other stuff. But it's incredible that when we do put our minds to it, we can. So I'm glad that I'm still around, and we're going back to the moon.
Yeah, you gonna add? And let's go to Roseanne. Roseanne, thanks for waiting. Roseanne's in Long Island. Hi there. Go ahead.
Hi, how you doing? I'm so glad that the crew came back safely and the mission was successful. I'm very curious.
New York, what?
Age slower than the people on Earth due to the distance and the speed.
The impact on the body when it was aging.
So that is a really great point, and there is a difference in aging when you're traveling at a great speed. For this type of mission, though, it was
too
so
short.
minimal that it won't probably be detectable by doctors. But it is something that will affect humans perhaps more as they do longer duration space flight, much further from Earth and traveling at great speeds. But for something like this mission, it won't be detectable what the difference is in terms of aging on Earth and on a mission.
Yeah, which aspect is it? Mark Kelly, the one that has a
Yes.
twin. And so right, they looked at physiologically did something happen different because he went to space or whatever. So yeah, to your point, even on space shuttle and space station, I don't think there's enough going on there to make something look different over a long time.
Yeah, so in medicine,
Somebody
people
watched
often like to use
Interstellar.
case studies because you get this great example of a way to compare what is happening to one person that
Where
isn't
like
happening
Matthew
to another
McConaughey
person.
doesn't
And
age,
so,
and his
Mark
daughter is
Kelly
older
created
than him
identical
when
twins. believe.
comes back.
And both astronauts. And so one of them went to the space station for a year and one of them stayed on Earth. And NASA did a lot of experiments on them to try to determine how their bodies changed or were different because of their experiences and where they were living. So there is some very fascinating research published on the differences that those two twins experienced because of one going to space for a year and one staying on
I
Earth.
wonder if that means that if you want to be an astronaut to go to the moon, is it best to be an identical twin? Is that an advantage? Maybe you could say, oh, look, you could do some studies here of my twin.
Maybe there should be a special astronaut class
Yes,
for the only
yeah.
recruiting identical twins.
Yeah.
In Washington State, Tiana, hello.
Hi, I was wondering how the capsules float on the water after landing.
The shape.
Yeah, so they're made to float. They are buoyant by their structure, and so
Looks like it's shaped like a buoy.
Yeah, they don't have a mass in there that's heavy enough. With that broad heat shield on the bottom, it's like a boat, right? It's not heavy enough to make it start to try to sink down in the water. So it's going to just float on the surface. And so we talked about, though, in Apollo, they did put kind of a flotation collar around it. I don't think it was particularly to not have it sink, but to just kind of keep it stable in the water. Here it appears that this broad, that capsule's bigger, right? So this capsule's a lot broader at the bottom. So maybe once you get it safely down, nose up, it'll just sit pretty steady in the water.
What's interesting is in the first American human spaceflight program, Project Mercury, part of the recovery actually included boosting the capsule a few inches out of the water, so it's sort of lifting it because it was sinking. Not sinking, but it was being situated too deep in the water to get the astronaut safely out of it. And so they had to sort of raise that one slightly as part of the recovery process. But that's not the case with Artemis or later spacecraft.
I see movement happening on this boat, something red. Maybe this is the front porch that they've been describing over the last.
Front a lot of new terms there.
Exactly.
Right, the front porch, the whatever, right? Not a lot of new acronyms, a lot of new terms.
I was wondering what they were putting in.
But there is, as we're waiting for the extraction of the astronauts, seems like the action going there as you're watching it. Let's go while we're watching it to May in Ohio. Hi.
So my class is they were talking everybody was talking about this space, just talking about space, and I was wondering what's it like to become an astronaut?
Good question.
Well, I think that for many people who are astronauts, it's something they've dreamed of for most of their life, and they worked really hard to qualify as an astronaut, and it's extremely difficult to be selected. So I think once you find out you're selected in the sort of the immediate aftermath, you're probably just really, really, really excited and ready to get to work. It's a challenging job, and you have to work around the clock. You have to train. You have to contribute to the systems. But I think on a day-to-day, it's pretty exciting that you get to be part of something that involves advancing science and contributes to exploration and our knowledge of the universe.
Yeah, and I think when they've talked to the crew on Artemis, they always
Getting
talk
bumpy.
about if you have this dream. Like Christina said, when she was 10 years old, they took a family trip to Kennedy Space Center, and she saw the Saturn V. And she was like, I couldn't imagine at 10 years old that someday I'd be on the way to the moon. And so I think that they talked to a number of them about how did you become an astronaut? What was it? They're like, you just got to stick to it. Like if you want to be an astronaut, you plan like, okay, what kind of education am I going to get? What kind of training am I going to get? And again, there's so many people that want to be an astronaut, but you just keep forcing yourself. And even if you get rejected, a lot of them did not make it into the astronaut corps their first application. And they're like, okay, what other skills do I need to develop? And nowadays, especially when we go back to the moon, you're going to need a lot of new skills. And so you're going to have people working on the moon that have to have all kinds of skills and construction and all kinds of other things. So I think that astronauts are not only just pilots anymore, they're going to have to be people who could work on the lunar surface and do science and research and things like that. So I think there's a
competition is going to be harder and harder as time goes by.
What I've heard is at least you just got to keep sticking with it. So.
And once you're an astronaut, you have to keep sticking with the training because you're going to be training for many, many hours, testing out all the different systems, spending lots of time in simulators. So a lot of the job of an astronaut before they get to space is the training, learning about geology, learning how to fly the spacecraft, learning what every single button does, where everything is stowed. So it's many hours of training and training and training and training.
Yeah, because this crew, I think, has been together for a number of years now, right? So they've been training together as a crew for this mission for quite a long time. And so, yeah.
They're still trying to take them out.
There is that red ring, so to speak, around there. I think that's the porch device perhaps that we were talking about. So, but we'll keep watching as the recovery effort.
Okay, so
let's-
after this live, we are going to be streaming
Yes.
a
good
portion
evening.
of a game
Apollo
my
11
son will be
10
playing
years
with his
old when
friend
Apollo 11 splashed down.
on the
And
PS5.
watching the Artemis 2
So
splash down brought back these emotions
let's
that
go,
I hadn't
astronauts.
felt
Come on
since
out.
the Apollo 11 splash down. And it gives me a lot of faith in humanity and
And stay tuned for the
ability to
second
decide
portion.
that we're going to discover what the universe is about. Thank you very much.
Happy Friday and happy spring break.
So that's perfectly said. So, right, it's this idea. And again, we've been thinking about going back to the moon forever. And we've had really good CAD drawings and really good simulations in a computer.
So after we end this live, we're gonna switch
The same way, right? So
and
you
create
see
a
that
second
pencil going
live
down, you're
with
like, okay, this is
them
real.
playing
These people
PS5.
have been to the moon and back over the last 9 days. That's incredible.
And as a historian, I suppose hearing that.
Yeah, exactly. And I also I relate to you because I found this mission quite emotional as well. And I've been surprised at the moments where I've been really moved by it. And it's sometimes hard to articulate what is happening or how magnificent it is and all the different stages of it. But it is an extremely moving mission.
That was the
and,
peppermint stage.
I'm so glad we now get to celebrate their safe return.
Well, and one of the coolest moments of the mission for me too was
grabbing the
when they
peppermint.
talked to the space station
Put it in your
crew.
mouth.
So it's this incredible world of like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you've got a space station crew talking to a lunar crew, and it's like, wow, we are living the 21st century.
I suppose both of you get the question though. We live in the age of drone. We live in the age of technology. But why bring humans into this? Why do humans have to be a factor at this stage?
It's a great debate, and I think it's one worth having. So back in around 1960, they had this debate as well, and the idea was that humans spark the imagination, they ignite the imagination. People will relate to them. That it's necessary. That
I mean, I don't think they have to be on board. They could control everything.
They decided to pursue a robust human spaceflight program. But today we also see incredible examples of people relating to the Mars rovers, for instance, almost making them characters, like they have personalities, and so there will be a question, I think, going forward is what is the role? Do people still need that to relate to spaceflight, to be captivated by it, or would we be captivated by virtual presence, for instance? Are there other ways that humans want to participate in space exploration and spaceflight? And I think that will evolve over time as our technology and the type of technology we're using in spaceflight evolves. But it is a great question to ask, and people come down on very different sides of that debate.
Yeah, when I first started working,
There's a wrap.
James Van Allen came to Goddard Space Flight Center. James Van Allen was the one who put the instrument on the first satellite from the U.S., right? So he came to give a talk at Goddard Space Flight Center, and he talked about, gee, why are we spending money on crew missions? Look at how much we can do with all these robotic missions. And I think that's true until you see this moment, until you
That's
are
a
all
human
inspired
part of
by
it.
humans and what they can accomplish. And the
That's
human
wonderful.
ingenuity and the human brain and soul
human
going
spirit.
somewhere and experience something and bringing that back, or having you virtually go along with them. I don't know what that is that makes us like that, but I think it's going to always be a critical part of spaceflight. So there's no robot that can bring out the emotions that this moment can bring out.
Speaking of emotions, let me dip in and hear some of the conversations that are going on as part of this recovery mission.
When there are flight operations happening, you can't have anything else, right? Just because the flight deck can be a dangerous place, so they just want to focus on planes coming and going from the ship. So that's why they wanted to get the boats in the water to make sure that they have all the time they needed for the flight ops. And then the same crew here out in the water, they will stay out in the water for a number of hours after we recover the crew and get them back on the ship, because then they have to recover Orion. All right, that stabilization collar looking good around Orion. We're now seeing some recovery personnel getting on to that collar. Again, they need to further attach it to Orion to make sure that it can really prop up the spacecraft. It's basically lifting it up off of the water just a tad. Again, so it's not so so it doesn't sway so much in the water there. And now that front porch looks like it's nearly fully inflated as well. You can see a much larger surface area. So once the crew get out of Orion, they can stretch their legs a little bit on this front porch, get some fresh air. And enjoy this beautiful day here on their home planet. It appears teams now are about to connect the front porch to the stabilization collar. And at that point, when both are secure, we should soon see astronauts come out of Orion. All these views you see also being fed to the Landing Force Operations Center here on the ship. Of course, it is very important for our recovery teams leading the mission to have all the views that you're seeing as well. Again, listening to their communication loop here on the ship. Very quiet, which is a good thing. It means things are going pretty nominally, meaning as expected.
Did that guy just fall?
Again, all this activity happening just 3,000 yards away from the ship. So that means this will be a very quick flight back on the helicopters for the crew. 2-3 minutes.
Imagine the whole world is watching this. It's crazy.
Okay, saw a thumbs up from one of the personnel on the front porch. It looks like they are now getting ready to.
There's got to be a better way to do this.
Air rescue vest, ARV. And so this is the harness that each crew member will get into in order to be hoisted into the helicopters. Again, those helicopters hovering just about 40 feet above the front.
Why
porch
can't a
from the
ship
runway.
come close? Have them transferred from the lifeboat to the ship. End of story. Instead of taking a hoisted plane ride, a hoisted helicopter ride to the ship. There has got to be a better way.
Control Houston. Behind me, a fairly raucous scene as hundreds of flight controllers have poured into the flight control room here. This is reminiscent of the scene after the final shuttle mission of STS-135, although that was the end of a program. This is only the beginning of a program with the textbook splashdown of Integrity and its 4 astronauts. We're standing by for the crew to be extracted from the spacecraft. Entry Flight Director Rick Hensling invited all of these flight controllers who have contributed to this mission to enter the flight control room and have an opportunity to receive well wishes.
So Artemis
and
was
to
the
share the
mission
glow that exists in the wake
or
of
the
a textbook
spaceship?
mission for Integrity on the front screen here in Mission Control.
And is
The sign that
Integrity
says,
the
"Welcome
pod?
Home Integrity, taking humanity back to the moon, going further, and returning safely to Earth." So all of that jubilation, part of the post-splashdown activities, even as we await the crew being extracted from the vehicle to be hoisted onto Navy helicopters for the trip back to the USS John P. Murtha.
Golly.
Once again here in Mission Control, this view
This
of
cameraman is fired, by the way.
Artemis Flight Control Room, known as the White Flight Control Room. This is the old shuttle flight control room, and now is the home of Artemis missions to the moon and beyond.
Look at all those smart people.
Once again, quite a few flight controllers were invited in by Entry Flight Director Rick Hensling to share in the jubilation following the successful splashdown of Integrity. That splashdown occurring an hour and 22 minutes ago, as we stand by for the completion of the extraction of the crew, and ultimately they're hoisting onto Navy helicopters for a short flight back to the USS John P. Murtha. Splashdown occurred at 7:07 and 27 seconds p.m. Central Time. I had an opportunity to talk to the head of flight dynamics, Jeff Birch, a moment or two ago. He said the trajectory of Integrity coming through the Earth's atmosphere was so precise, they've never seen anything line up on a ground track like today's entry by Integrity for its splashdown southwest of San Diego.
Ooh. Yay! First astronaut on the lifeboat. Was that the female? Ladies first?
Jubilation here in the flight control room. The first crew member is out of integrity.
Looks like they're walking, but they're being held up. But it looks like they took that step on their own.
We are expecting the other crew members momentarily to be extracted.
Yay!
Crew members out.
Let's go.
Two crew members out, 2 to go.
Only took 5 hours. Let's go.
We're about 1 hour from sunset out in the Pacific. Everything continues to go well. Integrity's systems functioned perfectly during its entry back to Earth. And Reed Wiseman, the commander who will be last out of the vehicle, reported that all the crew members were feeling very well.
Of course, they're G's. They're gangsta. They're space gangsters.
Crew member number 3 now out.
Let's go. Oh, that must be such a good feeling, having the sun in your face, smelling the ocean.
Stopping in the Pacific under almost ideal conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
694,000 miles.
No storm. I'm sure they calculated that.
Splashdown.
Last one. Let's go. These camera views are crazy. Like, are we not advanced enough to get better camera views?
And we now have.
Looks like they're using an old-timey camera.
4 crew members now out of integrity.
Let's go. Yay. Welcome home. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord.
Once again, all 4 crew members now on the front porch. And
Amen. Thank you, God.
To begin hoisting them up to these 2 Navy helicopters hovering overhead will begin shortly.
So there it is, all four: Ray Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook, and Jeremy Hansen now on that raft, ready to be lifted up and taken back to the John P. Murtha, the USS John P. Murtha. Tizomia Harmony, impressions of what you've just seen.
It's so exciting to see the astronauts safe and sound. But
They're on the front porch.
Mission control, all the cheers, the noise, and it just gives you a sense of how relieved they must be and how excited they must be at such a successful mission. It reminded me a little of the Apollo era, obviously, where mission control would break out in celebration when the astronauts returned, and there's stories of them waving little miniature American flags at splashdown, and back in that time they were also lighting up cigars to celebrate. A little different today, but still really a nice emotional celebration taking place in Houston.
Now we know that's unhealthy.
It's funny. Maybe I'm getting older. My memory's short. I'm already thinking about, okay, so what's next, right? So it's great to see this astronaut crew safe in that getting ready to be lifted out, but still, it's like, okay, that moment now, it was incredible from the time we were here last week until today. What happened in moving human spaceflight forward in the U.S., right? But it's like, okay, they're safe now, planning for the next mission, planning for the next mission. How do we keep building on this? And so there are many challenges ahead. So whether it's getting lunar landers ready, whether it's starting to plan for lunar bases, robotic missions back to the moon, we've got to keep it going. So I think it's like, I'm sorry, maybe I have a short memory span, but it's like as soon as I see them safe, I'm like, okay, a lot of people now have to work really hard to make this repeatable.
But it's always been that way. You finish one, you move on.
Oh, you gotta digest this one. I mean, there's still a lot of material. You go to YouTube, NASA's channel. I mean, you can spend so many more hours, and I think everyone should, because
That's right. YouTube, let's go.
Exciting. 9 days, 1 hour. And I really think that there's still so much to process. Those images, they're still comb through them. I mean, we haven't even seen everything that was all the data that was taken on this mission, the science, lessons from the spacecraft, but also those images and those experiences. So I think that yes, the mission is over, but there's so much shelter. There's so much more impact it's going to have, and it's not over yet, I think, yeah. But here, I'm a historian, so I look at the past and I'm like, oh, the past is the best stuff. I think there's so much exciting things going on. And on the International Space Station right now, humans have been living there for 25 years straight. Absolutely incredible. So there's, a lot of exciting things to pay attention to in spaceflight. Whether it be this mission, the next Artemis mission, the ISS, or all those other cool programs NASA has.
Jeff Wilson, the term technical perfection has come up so many times in this. Are you surprised by that at this stage?
Sure, because it's the first of its kind. I mean, Artemis 1 did prove out a lot of technology. They learned a lot of lessons, but an incredibly successful mission when it comes to technical perfection. I'll go back to, I think it's all the computer equipment we now have and the way we can tweak that computer equipment. We learned a lot of lessons from Artemis 1 that could all be baked into the Artemis 2 mission. So, but that doesn't undervalue the incredible work that went into making that happen so perfect. And so the word nominal or whatever is what space people will use to say, we just did an incredible job and everything worked extremely well because we.
So, the early Gemini missions, they had a joke where they named the spacecraft Molly Brown because one of the astronauts' previous spacecraft was filled with water and sunk, and so they jokingly named it Molly Brown. Now that ended the tradition of naming spacecraft for some time. NASA didn't think that was a funny joke, but with the Apollo era, eventually they started naming their spacecraft again. So you get with Apollo 11, you get Columbia, but this crew named this spacecraft, and I see that tradition carrying forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Is in Texas. And hello, thanks for holding on. Go ahead.
Hi, I was glad to hear that you had a couple of older ladies call in, but they didn't go back nearly far enough. I turned 72 in January, and my first memory of anything having to do with space was watching Sputnik flick across the sky in Dayton, Ohio, when I was 3 and 4 years old. And then on through Mercury, and through Gemini, and through Apollo, and the shuttle. I was a teacher for 43 years, and I had a TV in my classroom in Columbia, and that was hard.
No one's
But
mentioning.
we went on, and my
Chapter.
concern is that grandparents and parents and teachers are not helping our kids today understand, realize, appreciate the history
Mm-hmm.
of what has happened to get us to this point.
Preach.
And we need to encourage the kids to look up from the screens
Preach.
and into the sky. And then I have another little side because I'm a math teacher for most of my career, but I also like to integrate languages and mythology and all that. And I've not heard anybody say anything about the relationship between Apollo and Artemis.
Okay, and in Texas, Mr. Wilson.
I'm not sure. I remember the story. So, do you remember the story of Artemis?
The naming of Artemis?
Yeah. Well, in the relationship to Apollo.
Yes, I believe it was one of my friends actually that came up with the Artemis name. I think it was maybe sort of somewhat in the mix at NASA headquarters, but suggested it, and it seemed like a very suitable name. The Apollo name is actually sort of interesting because the Apollo program was named Apollo before the Apollo program got its shape, before it was a lunar exploration program. So what NASA did is that after Mercury did.
Why do they even need the helicopter? Why can't they just ride them all the way to shore or to the ship they need to get
The
to?
destination of Apollo wasn't set, and so that's part of the reason you get this sort of a little bit of a mixed match because Apollo is not the god of the moon. But today it's very, very fitting because Artemis is, and also the sister of Apollo. So you get that really wonderful connection between Apollo and Artemis, and
why do they look like they're
now you get
adrift?
a closer connection to the moon when it comes to mythology. But this decision to name these spacecraft after mythology comes. There was
It looks like they're just
a
drifting
NASA
away.
engineer who originally came up with the idea. He just happened to be reading a book of mythology, and he proposed Mercury and he proposed Apollo, and that tradition has continued. And interestingly, it's also a tradition taken up in other countries as well, where there are names of mythical figures related to the moon, for instance, that inspired the name of spacecraft and other hardware.
She mentioned Sputnik. You mentioned other countries. I'm curious your impressions of how other countries are watching this accomplishment by the United States, and I'll particularly say China, as I suppose, when they're watching these things happen.
Well, what's pretty wonderful is I bet people in China can follow this mission, and that is not true during Apollo 11. So China was one of the few places in the world where people were not getting information about the Apollo 11 mission. More information was actually accessible in Russia or I should say the Soviet Union. And within the Soviet Union, they actually were able to watch the splashdown live. Very interestingly, in China, there were many more limitations on access to information. And in 1969, things obviously evolved over time. But I will say one of the great joys this past week of watching all of the NASA YouTube channel streams is that you see all the comments and you see people saying they're coming from all over the world and they're posting their flags. And so you get this real sense that this is something that's capturing the attention of the world, and people are very enthusiastic. And I think much like during the Apollo era, the sense is that these are humans exploring space and that they can relate to all of us. And this is something about humankind exploring as opposed to sort of some of the limitations that come with thinking they're just from another country.
Yeah, and I think the big thing this time, Pedro, is that if you think about the Artemis Accords and you think about like, oh, the world is watching, much more of the world is involved now. Whether it's the European Space Agency, you've got a Canadian astronaut on board, you've got the Japanese building up lunar base capabilities that they'll be flying in the future. So I think nowadays you have a much bigger international participation with NASA. So people around the world, more of them can relate to what's happening because their countries are playing some role.
And this program is also a program of international cooperation, and that's how we're going to go to the moon in the future, or how we're going to explore Mars. Is that it's probably going to be through an international cooperative effort because it really is best done when it when it draws from the resources and that expertise of people from around the world. And so here you get this obvious example with Jeremy Hansen, but you also have the service module, which is built by the European Space Agency, and the entire Artemis program.
Oh, there it
still have
comes.
Contributions from U.S. partners around the world, which is exciting.
We see a helicopter approaching the raft right now,
Jeez.
and as we've been told by NASA, they'll be lifted up out of the raft and taken to the ships. Teasel Harmony, you were talking about the differences between harnesses at this point with that than in Apollo.
Yeah, so way back in the Mercury era,
There's
with
got
the
to be a
first
better
human
way to do
spaceflight
this.
program,
This is crazy.
the astronauts it was an individual astronaut, and they were lifted on a harness that sort of strapped around their body. By the Apollo era, they were lifted in sort of what appeared to be like hammocks, or it's sort of a net, but structured net system, which was standard to sort of Navy recovery procedure. So they really drew on the expertise and the talent of the Navy. What the Navy knew how to recover people from ocean situations, and so they used that technology and that expertise and applied it to the Apollo program.
I'm not sure as I'm watching this picture that they noodle through all the downwash from that helicopter. So it looks like they're giving them a bit of a ride there as they're hovering over. There's a lot of
Horrible
happening. So, but yeah, I think there's 2 helicopters, right? 2 crew going on each one of the helicopters. We haven't seen them harness up yet, so we're gonna see which technique they're using here.
They're harnessing up the first
I don't know if it looks like someone's holding maybe a cord to the harness, so we may see that in the next few moments as we go on, especially as the recovery effort takes place. As you're watching, let's hear from Anthony in Maryland. Anthony, go ahead.
Oh, they already got one?
Jeff, you guys are doing a fantastic
Even
job.
show them.
So exciting.
Anthony, let me pause you a sec. There's the first astronauts to go.
How'd they do that so quickly?
As far as the helicopter.
They just show them holding the string and they're already taking someone? There must have been a gap in the broadcast.
So exciting to watch. Family gather around the TV. We watch the launch. We watch the recovery. Couple questions like, it's things in space. Entertainment-wise, are they listening to like Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon? Is this South of the Moon? I gotta imagine they're doing that, right?
They did pick out a lot of different music. I think somebody probably would have suggested that though.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of information about the wake up music. So this is a long tradition in spaceflight, and these wake up songs were selected by their friends and family at home, and so I think some of them were playful or personal.
Oh, that's why, because they're taking them.
But I can
There's
tell you
more
one thing about
helicopters.
the Apollo era, they brought up cassette tapes. They have their mixtapes.
They already had someone in the air, and they never showed how they strapped them in.
Music preferences, and so a lot of country.
There has to have been a gap in the transmission.
Really fun playlist, and you can actually look up the playlist that the different Apollo crews brought up to keep themselves entertained in space. And I really hope we get more information from this crew if they were playing music as they were going around the far side. And we didn't have communication with them during that point, so it'll be great to learn more.
Again, there's the helicopters as part of the recovery effort as you're seeing it play out. Again, our coverage of this recovery or the return of the Artemis II Orion spacecraft back to Earth. There's another shot that you can look at. Let's hear from John. John in California. John, go ahead.
Well, first, congratulations.
There has just got to be a better way to do this.
I'm curious about what the options and alternate plans were today if the weather, because I'm in Northern California, and today we've had some ugly weather go through the thunderstorms and so forth. What weather cropped up in that landing zone?
Yeah, we were talking about that before. Is that there's not a lot of options at that point. You can't adjust that.
Right, because they were going to re-enter at that time.
So I think they could have done things to course correct a day or two ahead. So I think if they were going to make any decision, it would have had to be a little bit earlier in the sequence. Once they got to today, I heard that the weather was nominal at the landing site. I'm like, well, I think they're just coming in no matter what at this point. But I think that's where they would have made some adjustments, would have been like a day or two out if they forecasted anything negative coming in that area.
There's got to be a better way to do this. This is ridiculous.
Hello?
You're on, go ahead.
John Page. Two questions. How far off the coast of
Tomorrow, I guess.
is this?
It's because this is what I'm doing.
the others.
You can live stream tomorrow.
I will maybe 6. So I watched everything from the other listeners said Sputnik.
That was my son who wanted to live stream because he saw me live streaming.
And the question is, what is the difference in the diameter of Artemis 2 and the Apollo?
Okay, John in Texas.
Yeah, so do you remember the Apollo one? So this one's like, what, 13 feet across, I think, at the bottom. So it's definitely bigger.
Yes, I want to say Apollo is between 10 and 11 off the top of my head.
Yeah, so it's definitely bigger. And so
Jeez.
your other question was related to how far off the coast, and you were trying to look to see if it's a number. It was not far. When you see the map, you're more than 100 miles off the coast. It looks like they were pretty close by the time they landed.
Yeah, but far enough that they said you wouldn't be able to see the splashdown.
It must feel so good for them to finally just
in that sense.
There's
get home or even land on the ship.
You were curious about the comparison of
But when they reach land, and then they go home, and then they go in their bed, which is no time soon, but that must feel so good.
Square feet, and Artemis is 330, I believe.
So what you're seeing is just off the coast of San Diego, where the Orion Integrity splashed down. We showed you pictures from people watching that from the National or the Air and Space Museum in San Diego. That's where Ryan Thompson was for that watch party. So, Mr. Thompson, what was the reaction and what has it been since the splashdown?
Guys, celebration certainly still continuing, especially as we've seen the crew of Artemis 2 be lifted off and taken to that Navy carrier for treatment. You know, all the sentiment that you've heard calling into your show over the last few hours, that's been the sentiment in this room. And that initial uneasiness, concern about those risky mission moments of the mission, giving way to just pure jubilation, excitement, and joy watching what has been an amazing feat for NASA. And you mentioned the fact that we are here in San Diego. This location is particular because we're only about 100 miles or so from where that crew actually splashed down into the Pacific Ocean. There were some people at this watch party who actually ran outside to hear the sonic boom, which was supposedly audible to some people in Southern California. Just
That's
because
interesting.
of the force of the craft entering the atmosphere.
Last person's up.
It's supposed to end at 7 o'clock local time, but there are still several hundreds of stragglers here. It's unlikely that they're going to go anywhere anytime soon, especially as this mission is still carrying on into the next hour. Guys.
Ryan Thompson from Spectrum News. Thanks for your coverage. Thanks for taking and telling us about that from San Diego. Thank you. For our guests, I guess now what is now the astronauts are aboard. They're heading back to the ship. We talked about this earlier, but next steps. Where do we go from here as far as today is concerned?
Well, yeah, and I was thinking about what Ryan said, the sonic boom thing. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
But what's happening like 3 or 4 minutes before they splash down is they're going from supersonic to subsonic. So just like the space shuttle landing at Florida, you're going to hear that sonic boom, and that's going to carry pretty well. So you might not visibly be able to see it, but I don't doubt that some people in San Diego might have heard the sonic boom. And that was right before you saw the parachute deploy. So those drogue chutes come out after you go through your subsonic, and now you can start deploying parachutes. So as we saw that happening, the sonic boom had just happened before that.
So now there are the helicopters heading back towards the USS John P. Murtha. The astronauts on board getting medical examinations once they on board. Let's watch a little bit of this.
And wheels down. Wheels down of the first helicopter carrying 2 of our Artemis 2 crew.
Oh, 2 in
Victor
1.
Glover and mission specialist Christina Hook. Kilo 1 on deck reported on the recovery loop and the mission audio loops that the recovery team are using here to communicate with one another. And an announcement just made on the ship: integrity incoming.
Integrity incoming.
2 more helicopters on their way to the flight deck, one carrying the crew, the other, one of our imagery helicopters, Again, kudos to our imagery and aerial team.
What? That was the
for
worst.
giving us these beautiful views.
Awful camera views.
Set amid a gorgeous, soon-to-be sunset here in the Pacific.
Yeah, the weather was perfect. Praise the Lord. Let's go.
Second helicopter. Making its approach of the flight deck. Plenty of people here on the bow with their cell phones out, filming this moment. So impressive flying here by the Navy. As we are seconds away from wheels down. And there you go. We now have
Wheels
all
down.
four Artemis 2 crew members
Wheels down.
on the USS John P. Murtha. I'm sure they're happy to be out of the water
Mm-hmm.
and on this recovery ship. But again, 550 people on board.
Jesus, turn off the
Welcome them home.
propellers.
But first,
Rotors.
as we've been saying throughout the podcast, just making sure the crew feel good. We reported that they were feeling good when they were in Orion, but those were just initial, quick, verbal assessments of how they're feeling. Their destination tonight, the medical bay here on the ship. Right after we power down the helicopters here. The team on the flight deck, working quickly but methodically. Limited personnel here on the flight deck.
They still have the helicopters going. Like, shut them down. There's four, but three of them had the crew. Two in one and one in each of the other ones, I guess. That fourth one was like imagery helicopter. The videographer, I guess. Who I think did a terrible job. That video was so blurry for most of it. Like a drone could have done better.
Well, just a few folks on the flight deck itself. There are plenty more on some upper deck.
A drone would have filmed clearer than that.
Announcements being made over the ship's loudspeaker system, reminding folks to stay clear of operational areas like the flight deck.
They're going to the medical bay on the ship now.
To get the crew off into helicopters and into the medical bay.
Imagine you land on Earth from space safely, thank God, and then you have to wait hours before you actually get where you need to go. And even hours and hours more to go home and see your family.
We are within 2 hours of that splashdown time.
Like, why are they not powered down yet?
Deck of the USS John P. Murtha.
There's coverage of the astronauts on board the USS John P. Murtha, Jeff Pelosi. Things happening at a quicker rate now. It's now that it's all sun.
Yeah, but you know, it's still we're as we're watching this whole
So
week.
slow. What are you talking about?
So I think for the viewer, it's like, come on, let's
Yeah.
see. I think even when they were in the capsule, it's like you're waiting, but you don't realize how many people are checking this, checking that, making sure the crew is okay, making sure the capsule's okay.
Look, they're all grounded and locked. Power them down.
Yeah. They should be fine. Jump out and just see them. So So I think it's exciting to watch, but I think the anticipation is always
Yeah.
"Come on, let's go."
Come on is writing. There we go. Colleague.
Everything we've heard so far is that they're doing really well, and it's just such a great sign. And every time we see them, it's a good confirmation that they're doing really well. So it'll be so exciting when they
Look at the guy there in the green. This guy right here. This guy right here. He's like, I guess as the propeller slow down,
We're ready. We've
they
got
show what they're doing. Or the rotors.
before they'll let them do a press conference. But I'm hoping that in the next day or so, we start to hear more about seeing the crew and hearing from them.
Viewers, we are expecting a press conference from NASA later on this evening, approximately a half hour, an hour or so. I don't believe it will feature astronauts, but at least they'll be talking about the concluded Artemis 2 mission as you're watching it play out there on the screen. Our two
Come
guests.
on. Let them out. They gotta pee. I'm sure they have to pee by now. Ooh, I was joking before, but I'm sure they really gotta pee now.
This post after.
So the whole world was watching this live. Huge numbers of people were watching the splashdown, the recovery live. President Nixon was there, as I mentioned before, but hundreds of millions of people.
Here they come. It's them in the orange.
So people were captivated. Just like this mission, it took some time to get to the point where you have the astronauts able to speak to the broader public. They were able to take a shower, which I think they were in need of.
When? Oh. I was gonna say, when did they take a shower?
Apollo they changed into other clothes, and then they were able to speak to President Nixon. He thanked them, and this was broadcast as well. So
Right. So I said, are they able to wash their hair in space? So they can't take a shower in space. Oh my! I know they wipe themselves clean, I'm sure, but yikes!
Parent.
Imagine not taking a shower though.
With the public and with the press, and this was a precedent from the early space age. The United States actually invited press to watch the first attempt at launching a satellite, which didn't go well. It exploded on the launch pad. It was seen as, potentially quite embarrassing, but many people interpreted that as, transparency. This is what happens in an open democratic society, and the U.S. continued to choose that with additional programs, sharing information when there were accidents or when there were successes. And then this is a part of the program. And I think it helps encourage people to relate to it and to trust it. And it's wonderful to see that there's still so much information available.
Yes, and I think I've seen this, in Artemis, there's been a big effort. Whenever there's an anomaly or some issue, they've got the experts in front of, NASA brings out their experts, they have the press engaged. And finally, there is crew coming out of the doorway. And they're sitting in the doorway.
Yeah.
So they're moving.
And while they're sitting in the doorway looking at that, let's get another perspective on the day's events. Joining us by Zoom, Matt O'Dowd, he's an astrophysics. He's with the host of PBS Space Time. Mr. O'Dowd, thanks for your time today.
Hello, it's such a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about, first of all, PBS Space Time, and then give us your impressions of
Wheelchairs.
Sure. PBS Space Time is
They're bringing wheelchairs.
most of the time. It's we explore the universe on different levels, astronomy, space travel, but also physics.
They brought wheelchairs for them. I guess it's really hard for them
to understand reality.
With that, oh, go ahead.
Well, this was incredible. So I'm an astrophysicist. I think I misread the course syllabus, or at least watching all of this, I kind of wish I was an astronaut, because what these people just achieved and experienced, tingles.
What do you believe the
Yes, it's tingling.
days or so will teach us about astrophysics?
That's what I want to know. What have we learned? I know this costs a lot of money. What have we learned?
teach us a lot about astrophysics. A ton was learned about the near Earth environment, which was a huge part of the goal of these earlier Artemis flights. And this was the first time that human beings have been beyond the
You
protection
can see them hugging
field.
and shaking hands over here. What's going on?
Back then we didn't have the sort of sensing and measuring devices that we do now. So we have a huge suite of data on the nature of the radiation out there, on its effect on the human body, that among many other experiments that are going to make going back to the moon much safer. So we learned about the near Earth environment, and when that lets us get boots back on the moon, there's
Boots on the moon. That's from the show Space Force. Boots on the moon. I mean, that joke is.
Future of space exploration by the United States or other countries, where do you think we'll learn about going back to the moon? What do you think it will teach us?
I don't think people realize enough how extraordinary our moon is. In astronomy, we often say that there are two main questions. One is, where did we come from? The other is, are we alone? And the moon can answer both of those questions. We believe that it formed in an extraordinary event in which a Mars-sized body smashed into the Earth during its formation and flung out part of the moon. So it's very much a part of the Earth in that sense. But since that happened, it's been kind of frozen, no atmosphere, no tectonics, and it's accumulated a record of everything that's happened in the solar system since it first formed. And so by going back to the moon, understanding what it's made of, understanding the cratering, we can really get this map of the history of the solar system and the formation of the Earth.
From what we've seen of the moon over the last 10 days because of this mission, did anything stand out for you as far as the pictures or other data that came back from it?
They were incredible. The beauty struck me first. The far side of the moon has never been seen by humans until the Apollo missions, and there are parts of the far side of the moon that hadn't been seen until the Artemis 2. It's a rugged place. It's more ancient than the side that faces the Earth, due to reasons that I could get into. But it's heavily cratered. It's quite, it's kind of toothy and ancient, and it potentially holds more secrets.
When it comes to science and the work of physics, Mr. O'Dowd, where do you think that science has to go as far as the questions it has to ask of not only the moon, but our place in it and are eventually going back to it?
So, we want to know how the Earth formed because we want to understand how we ended up here in this universe. But as I said, another question is, are we alone? And the moon is a rare thing. It's gigantic for a moon. It's the largest compared to the planet in the solar system. And many people think that perhaps the moon was important also in the development of life for a variety of reasons, and understanding the moon's influence on the Earth could actually teach us about the likelihood of life out there. If moons such as this are rare, life may be rare. If they're common, well, maybe we have neighbors.
We're watching some of the astronauts now leaving the helicopters from the USS John P. Murtha, some walking across towards the medical bay. We're going to continue showing you that as we continue our conversation with Matt O'Dowd. Mr. O'Dowd, when it comes to questions to ask or where the future is when it comes to space exploration, what would you like to see?
It is true that we can do a lot with robots. We've sent robots to Mars and uncovered incredible things. We can send robots to the moon.
Right now.
There's an advantage to sending humans. We can make quick decisions. There's a long time delay. It's a couple of seconds for the moon, but it's several minutes to Mars and even longer. So we can make very quick decisions, scientific decisions, emergency decisions. But I think there's a bigger reason to send people, and why I'm really excited that these sorts of missions are starting up again. And that's just that I guess there's a layer of abstraction between us and the robot on the moon and us and the robot on Mars. But when you know that there's a real human being, much like you and I, perhaps a little more badass, out there experiencing it, then it really brings the universe home, and it unifies us with what's out there. It makes it feel more visceral, more real. I was lucky enough to see Artemis 2 launch, and you know, seeing that thing blast off, seeing that giant rocket sort of rumble and hover on its fire and then shoot up into space, it just made
Didn't need the wheelchair. He's a boss.
these missions bring to all humanity.
Matt O'Dell with PBS Space Time. Thanks for your input this today.
Thank you.
Let's talk about it, because as we're talking, we're seeing astronauts walking across the deck, and you both were very staring intently at it. What's your impressions right now?
Well, this is sort of funny. So I was looking to see. It looks like they might be wearing hats, and of course, everything reminds me of Apollo. But this reminded me of Apollo too, because the astronauts got these special hats. The entire crew of the aircraft carrier had them. They had the name USS Hornet. And for Apollo 11, there was this phrase that was adopted in celebration, and it was Hornet +3, which meant that it was the USS Hornet plus the 3 astronauts that they recovered. But it was a very distinctive design of a hat, and
Look at the sunset.
something similar.
9 days. Maybe it was yeah.
But they seem to be doing really well. And I only got 3 of them coming out, but it was great to see them doing so well.
And one was clapping. It seems like good spirits. And I imagine after a ordeal like this, that's amazing to see.
They did have people around them. It seemed like just in case, right? But they all seem to be doing really well coming off. So, hey, and to go back to what your guest, Mr. Dad, was talking about too, about what is the moon going to tell us? And now when we go back more often, what are we going to learn? I think the most interesting thing is right now, you asked about China before. There's a Chinese robotic mission rolling to the launch pad to go to the South Pole of the moon. And so what's going to happen is it's going to be very interesting. Partnership around the world, the same location, South Pole of the moon, to try to do some exploration. So I don't know how crowded it's going to get. I guess there's plenty of room for everybody, but I think we're all now focused on what to do our exploring, set up our
They're all high-fiving. Yeah, very cool.
as soon as you're both establishing human outposts at the same locations, more or less, are there safety regulations put in place, right? There was agreements with the Soviet Union about if there's stranded astronauts, could one crew
This
take
was the peppermint stage.
between countries? So the South Pole of the moon could be
God, that landing looks so hard.
we discussed the pressure inside a habitat. Is it going to be common so
And
that
I didn't see them retrieving the parachutes.
I think a lot of that's going to happen because we're all are going to the same place.
What is it about the south side or south?
It's that water.
And if
ice
it
that-
just sank and it stayed connected to the pod, then were they dragging it across the ocean? Because that can't be good environmentally.
and we think that dent was put there potentially by asteroids and comets that hit it in the early formation after it was formed. There's other reasons why water ice might have gotten to the South Pole, but that's one of them. And so there's the potential that there are buried comets. NASA spends a lot of money to go to a comet to bring back a little sample, right? Can imagine if there's actual comets buried at the bottom of the moon and have a lot of water ice in them. People will talk about, oh, we could turn it into rocket fuel. Oh, we could turn it into drinking water and oxygen for the crew. And I'm like, yeah, and you could study that because that's some primordial material from the early solar system embedded with ice. Who knows what's living in there, right? So, or could have lived in.
Let's not check or bring it here. Thank you. I don't think that would be a good idea.
And then it's the exploitation of a resource, common human feature, right? If you can find a resource, why
You guys clearly didn't watch that movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, where they brought back like a killer being.
Hi, I'm Nathan now. You guys are doing a great job. I just have 2 questions. I was wondering how the spacecraft got through the space junk, and also I was wondering when the spacecraft was going down for the splashdown. I was wondering if it felt like the astronauts were
Hi, girl. Nice flying.
That's a really good question because maybe during Apollo, there just wasn't so many things in space, period. Now we do have to worry about that all for when they come towards the Earth, that last hour or two that they were coming in, they are passing through a fair amount of orbits where there are other satellites. So before the launch, they do a lot of analysis we track a lot of the space junk and active satellites. So they do a lot of analysis of the incoming trajectory to know that it's nowhere near anything that could damage the spacecraft. Now, that doesn't say that something might not happen, right? So the best we can do is just try to analyze it ahead of time, use all the tracking data we have available that we know where stuff is in space.
All right, guys, looks like they're gonna do their press conference later at NASA. Thank you for watching. This was so exciting and fun.
But yeah,
And I'm sure you'll see all the videos from their interviews. I'll try to post one on our TikTok, same name as this channel.
G is what they anticipate.
Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.
The second drop.
And then that's